For millennia, the Great Pyramid of Giza has stood tall amidst the desert, more like a natural wonder than a man-made structure. The colossal stone blocks stacked into a perfect triangular shape continue to astonish future generations. How can ancient civilization have built such eternal monuments? Egypt, the land of the Pharaohs, was once shrouded in a veil of mystery. The ancient Greeks praised it, the Romans admired it. But for centuries, the writing system of the Egyptians was lost, turning an entire civilization into a silent enigma. Until one summer day, July 19, 1799, during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, a French soldier happened upon a strange stone slab near the town of Rosetta, roughly 35 miles from Alexandria. On its surface, the same inscription was carved in three scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. The Rosetta Stone. It became the key that unlocked the door closed for thousands of years. Thanks to that translation, humanity finally deciphered the voice of an ancient civilization. And when Egypt spoke again, everything began with the Nile River, the longest river in the world. It flooded annually, carrying silt from distant highlands to enrich the farmlands, transforming arid desert into fertile ground. From this river, people planted seeds, raised livestock, built villages. A civilization began to take its first steps. But the Nile not only nourished, it also divided. To the south lay Upper Egypt, a narrow valley where the river flowed swiftly between rocky hills. Life here was harsh, and its people, hardened, lived in close bond with the river. To the north stretched Lower Egypt, a vast delta of fertile plains, densely populated, with fields spreading all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Two lands, two characters, two kingdoms. Life revolved around the flood season and the harvest. They grew wheat, wove linen, domesticated cattle and sheep. In each reed-thatched home, beside the endless fields, early customs and beliefs began to take root. The sun god Ra who lit the world, the Nile god who granted sustenance, and a belief that death was merely a threshold to new life. They etched this faith into stone, turning symbols into hieroglyphs, turning images into an eternal language. Early Egyptian culture stood out for its profound connection between humans and nature. Every flood, every sunrise was sanctified. Every primitive tomb was a prayer for immortality. And between the two lands, Upper and Lower, there were conflicts and rivalries that eventually led to a great unification under a single pharaoh, King Narmer, around 3100 BCE. On a stone artifact known as a Narmer palette, the image of the king wearing both crowns, the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, stands as the clearest symbol of this unification. A firm hand forged two lands into a single empire. This event was not merely a military conquest. It marked a turning point from scattered communities and small states into one unified nation, with its first capital at Memphis, strategically placed between the two regions to maintain balance. From this point onward, the pharaoh was no longer just a king, but the embodiment of the divine on earth, ruling with both authority and sacredness. The moment Narmer unified Egypt was a drumbeat that signaled the birth of ancient Egyptian civilization, a civilization that would endure for more than 3 millennia and leave an immortal legacy in human history. Before Egypt had pharaohs and pyramids, this land underwent thousands of years of experimentation and adaptation. In Lower Egypt, communities like Merimd and Fayum, circa 5200 to 4500 BCE, lived near lakes and plains, sowing wheat and barley, raising cattle and goats, crafting coarse pottery, and building homes from reeds. They still hunted and foraged, but had already learned to store food for the dry season. Further south, in Upper Egypt, the Tajan people, around 4500 BCE, left behind simple earthen graves, where the deceased were buried with pottery and bead necklaces, early signs of belief in an afterlife. They were followed by the Hayfian community, 4400 to 4000 BCE, a small group in the Asiad, Sohag region. The Hayfians left reddish-brown pottery decorated with wave patterns and dotted motifs, along with modest burials that still included grave goods. They were not yet strong enough to spark major change, but they formed a vital bridge that prepared the way for the next stage of development. Around 5000 BCE, building on that foundation, the Badarian culture emerged in central Upper Egypt, where the first distinctive archaeological remains were discovered. The Badarian people were in the midst of transitioning from a hunter-gatherer society to settled agriculture. In other words, they had not fully abandoned the old ways and continued to practice both. When the Nile's floodwaters receded, the smooth, dark silt left behind became the fertile ground where they sowed emmer, wheat, and barley, two staple grains that would sustain the Egyptian people for millennia. Though agricultural productivity was still rudimentary, it was sufficient to feed the community. Alongside farming, they domesticated livestock. Cattle provided milk. Sheep and goats offered meat, wool, and hides, and pigs were raised in villages as a regular food source. Even so, the Badarians could not yet rely solely on agriculture. Hunting and foraging remained essential parts of daily life. Flint arrowheads and stone knives found in graves show they hunted antelope, gazelles, and even small crocodiles along the riverbanks. Women and children gathered berries, wild seeds, and edible plants along the shores to supplement their diet. Their tools were still primitive, but significant innovations had already appeared. They crafted knives and sickles from chipped flint with wooden handles, arrows from bone and stone, needles from bone, small hand axes for chopping wood, nets and fishing rods for catching fish. These inventions show that they begun combining various materials, stone, bone, wood, and plant fiber, to make tools adapted to their changing lives. Though their communities were small, traces of social organization had begun to appear. In each village, authority rested with a tribal chief who coordinated planting, hunting, and food distribution. There were young warriors, craftsmen, and a broad base of farmers and herders. His power was rooted in collective agreement, and he also led primitive riverside rituals, praying for the flood and the harvest. In the dusty soil of Badari, archaeologists have unearthed simple graves. The dead were laid on their side, wrapped in grass mats, buried with clay pots, bone or ivory necklaces, and sometimes stone knives. These objects were not random. They reflect a deeply human belief that death was not the end, but merely another journey, where the departed would still need food and tools to continue living. In those same graves, archaeologists also discovered fine pottery, deep red vessels with glossy black rims. These were produced using firing techniques so refined that even thousands of years later, the pottery still retains its luster. Every line, every simple motif, speaks silently of the earliest Egyptian craftsmen. Seen from today, Badarian culture may appear humble, yet it was from these early seeds that a civilization began to grow. The small riverside villages, the reed-thatched homes, the graves with pottery and adornments. They marked the first steps on Egypt's path toward becoming an eternal empire. By around 4000 BCE, following the Badarian period, the small riverside communities along the Nile had gradually grown in population and stability. Villages began to appear one after another along the riverbanks, and the fertile alluvial soil became the foundation for an increasingly agricultural way of life. It was also during this time that the first local centers emerged, most prominently in Upper Egypt, where clans began to unite, consolidate power, and set in motion the path toward the formation of early proto-states. Upper Egypt, from approximately 4000 to 3500 BCE, was the most dynamic region during the rise of the Naqada I culture. Situated along the narrow Nile Valley and flanked by scorched desert ranges, this land became the cradle of significant developments in Egypt's pre-dynastic history. Among the early centers, Hierakonpolis, the city of the falcon god Horus, rose to prominence as a nucleus of power, serving both as an embryonic political capital and as a religious hub. The people of Upper Egypt lived in close harmony with the Nile. They cultivated wheat and barley on the rich black silt, raised cattle, sheep, and goats for meat, milk, and hides. In addition to agriculture, crafts entered a new phase. Flax was woven into cloth, used both for clothing and for wrapping the dead. Flint tools grew more sophisticated. Axes and blades were meticulously sharpened, serving both productive and defensive purposes. Copper had just begun to appear, though still rare and used only in prized items. In the villages, power gradually became centralized in the hands of tribal chieftains. They controlled the land, coordinated agricultural seasons, and commanded warrior groups, forces tasked with protecting the community from wild animals and rival tribes alike. A clearer social hierarchy was beginning to emerge. At the top were the chieftains and their families, followed by warriors, craftsmen, and then the broader population of farmers and herders. Culture and art began to reflect these shifts. Thin red-black pottery, adorned with wave motifs, boats, and animals, served both practical and symbolic purposes. On desert cliffs, people carved scenes of hunting, boat processions, and human conflict, evidence of an increasingly complex and organized society. In cemeteries, the tombs of tribal leaders stood out for size and richness, filled with grave goods, pottery, jewelry, tools, offering a glimpse into growing belief in an afterlife. At the same time, religious beliefs became more clearly defined. People began to worship the forces of nature, the sun god who brought light, and the Nile god who bestowed silt and life. Communal rituals, such as grain offerings and prayers for the timely arrival of the flood, were not only acts of faith, but also threads that bound society together, uniting communities under a shared trust in divine protection. Lower Egypt during the Naqada period presented a contrasting yet complementary picture to Upper Egypt. The Nile Delta in the north, expansive and fertile, was one of the most bountiful plains of the ancient world. Unlike the narrow valley hemmed in by desert in the south, the delta opened onto a vast horizon, crisscrossed by river branches and teeming with birds, fish, and lush vegetation. From this deltaic region, Egypt had direct access to the Mediterranean and the Near East, allowing it to receive early waves of trade and cultural exchange. The life of Lower Egyptian inhabitants was rooted in their abundant agricultural base. On thick layers of silt, they not only cultivated wheat and barley, but also grew a variety of vegetables, crops that were difficult to farm in the south. Animal husbandry thrived, and along the riverbanks, fishing and the hunting of waterfowl provided a plentiful food supply. Notably, Madi, one of the region's major centers, emerged as a trade hub. From here, goods from the Near East, copper, cedar wood, and resin arrived overland or by sea and spread inland into Egypt. Traces of camels and donkeys suggest that residents had begun experimenting with overland transport using livestock, extending their trade networks well beyond the Nile Valley. However, the society of Lower Egypt had not yet formed the centralized political power seen in Upper Egypt. Its communities remained small and village-based, where leadership played more of a coordinating role in production and trade than one of absolute authority. As a result, though the delta was rich, it remained fragmented and did not give rise to powerful proto-states like Naqada or Hierakonpolis in the south. In terms of culture and art, Lower Egyptian pottery was typically simple with little elaborate decoration, but it was durable and practical. Through trade, copper tools appeared earlier here, bearing marks of foreign influence from the Near East. The Mahdi cemeteries revealed distinct burial customs, small graves with few grave goods, reflecting a society that had not yet emphasized individual power or the display of status as seen in the South. Religious beliefs in Lower Egypt remained closely tied to the natural world. The fresh waters of the river, the fertile alluvial soil, schools of fish, and flocks of birds. Unlike Upper Egypt, where Hierakonpolis was already emerging as a religious center, Lower Egypt maintained a decentralized and diverse set of beliefs, with no dominant protective deity. Taken as a whole, the two regions of North and South had begun to follow divergent paths. Upper Egypt consolidated its power into early proto-states, gradually evolving into a strong political force. Lower Egypt became a gateway of commerce, connecting Egypt with the outside world. This very difference laid the groundwork for a historical rivalry that would culminate in a dramatic conquest and unification under Narmer, ushering in the dynastic era of ancient Egyptian history. After the Naqada period, Egypt entered a phase of accelerated growth. Upper Egypt, with key centers like Naqada, Abydos, and Hierakonpolis, gradually gained dominance. Local chieftains expanded their authority and organized military forces. The South became the political nucleus, where small states began to unite into larger power blocks. Meanwhile, Lower Egypt, with cities such as Madi and Buto, continued to serve as Egypt's gateway for trade. Its proximity to the Mediterranean and the Near East allowed for the steady import of copper, cedar wood, resin, and precious stones, which were then distributed throughout the Nile Valley. International relations flourished. From Nubia came gold, ivory, and animal skins. From the Near East, copper and fine woods. At the same time, warfare and military organization increasingly became tools for expanding influence, signaling a society on the verge of unification and state formation. During the Naqadite period, villages in Upper Egypt were only loosely connected, but by the time of Naqada II, Naqada and especially Hierakonpolis had evolved into true centers of power. Here, chieftains were no longer merely village leaders. They began to claim formal titles, assert their authority through ritual, military power, and elaborate burials, laying the groundwork for early kingship. A stable agricultural base generated surplus, giving rise to a noble class that controlled both production and trade. The military became a pillar of society, as depicted in carvings and pottery portraying warriors, processions, and warships. Rock carvings at Gebel El-Arak and Hierakonpolis reveal scenes of battle and territorial ambition, reflecting growing expansionist tendencies. Trade also intensified. Ornaments made from seashells, ivory, and imported gemstones became increasingly common. Burial practices, too, evolved. Graves were no longer modest as in Naqada I, but had grown into symbols of power, larger in size, containing multiple chambers and rich with grave goods. At Abydos and Naqada, these aristocratic tombs were precursors to royal mausoleums, representing a significant leap beyond earlier traditions. While Upper Egypt rose to become the dominant political force, Lower Egypt, with Mahdi and Buto, remained focused on trade with the Near East and the Mediterranean. The fertile delta sustained stable agriculture, but the northern region depended far more on international commerce than on political or military organization. Archaeological findings at Mahdi reveal numerous foreign artifacts, red copper, cedar wood, gemstones, and resin, all pointing to its role as a resource transit hub. However, pottery remained simple. Copper tools were mostly imported, and there was little sign of ritual art or militarization like that seen at Hierakonpolis. Society remained fragmented, with no strong ruling class. This disparity is clearly reflected in burial practices. Graves were small and sparsely furnished, in stark contrast to the multi-chambered elite tombs of Abydos, highlighting the growing power imbalance between north and south. If, during Naqada II, southern chieftains were still influential only within individual polities, then by the Naqada III period, 3200 to 3150 BCE, power had begun to concentrate significantly. The three major centers, Naqada, Abydos, and Hierakonpolis, became the political pillars of Upper Egypt. Hierakonpolis, in particular, rose as a proto-capital, serving both as a site of major rituals and as a military stronghold. Unlike earlier periods, the leaders of this era were no longer simply tribal heads. They began to assume the form of proto-kings, ruling over multiple villages, commanding armies, possessing grand tombs, and leaving symbols of their authority on artifacts. The military became a cornerstone of society. Warrior bands were organized, equipped with spears, axes, wooden shields, and warships to patrol the Nile. Conflict with the north and among southern city-states occurred frequently, laying the foundation for unification through warfare. Art was no longer just a reflection of daily life. It became a vehicle for power projection. Rock carvings and pottery began to depict bound prisoners, warrior processions, and chieftain rituals, clearly showcasing the dominance of the ruling elite. Tombs at Abydos were now constructed with multiple mud brick chambers and contained abundant grave goods. This marked a stark shift from Naqada II, when elite graves were only marginally larger than those of commoners. By Naqada III, such burials became statements of power and precursors to royal necropolises. Most notably, the first signs of writing emerged. Symbols etched onto pottery, ivory tags, and stone slabs at Abydos and Hierakonpolis. Though not yet full-fledged texts, these inscriptions function as identifiers, marks of authority and chieftain names, signaling the birth of Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, nearly contemporaneous with the cuneiform script of Mesopotamia. While Upper Egypt had developed powerful centers of authority, Lower Egypt, with important sites such as Mahdi and Buto, remained primarily a gateway for trade with the Near East and the Mediterranean. Wealthy from imported copper, cedar, resin, and gemstones, it lacked political consolidation. No single leader had the strength to stand against the southern forces. Burials in Lower Egypt were modest, with few grave goods, in stark contrast to the multi-room tombs filled with offerings in Abydos. This absence of elite tombs reflected the lack of a strong aristocracy. Ritual art and military iconography were virtually absent, and most copper tools were imports, revealing a society oriented more toward commerce and practicality than toward political or military strength. As a result, Lower Egypt became a land of wealth but weakness, and, in the eyes of Upper Egyptian rulers, an ideal target for expansion. This vulnerability opened the way for Narmer's campaign to unify North and South, ending the era of division. By around 3150 BCE, each major southern center, Naqada, Hierakonpolis, and Abydos, also known as Thinis, had its own ruler who controlled land, warriors, and religious rites. In their competition for supremacy, these rulers engaged in a prolonged series of conflicts, which historians often refer to as the Southern Civil War. Throughout this process, Thinis began to gain the upper hand. Its leaders not only relied on the fertile agricultural base surrounding them, but also leveraged their strategic location between Upper and Lower Egypt to dominate trade routes. Through military campaigns and political alliances, they gradually conquered neighboring polities, compelling smaller chieftains to submit. By the end of this period, a single dynasty based in Abydos emerged as the undisputed power in the south, later known as the Tenite dynasty, marking the dawn of pharaonic rule. Once the south had been unified, the rulers of Abydos and Hierakonpolis turned their gaze northward, to the fertile yet politically fragmented delta. The only viable route to the north was along the Nile, which now became the primary battleground. By this time, the Southern Army was highly organized. Warriors were equipped with spears, axes, and wooden shields, and they advanced aboard warships. Step by step, they seized ports, disrupted trade routes, and took control of key Nile branches. Archaeological evidence, particularly the carvings at Gebel el-Iraq, depicts intense scenes. Fleets loaded with soldiers, bound enemies on their knees, and prisoners being executed. During the same period, there were efforts in Lower Egypt to resist the southern advance. A number of artifacts, including pottery shards, seal impressions, and symbol carvings, mention a figure whom scholars refer to as the Bull's Head King, named after bull head symbol associated with him. This symbol likely represented strength, prosperity, and protection, an attempt to build a northern image of leadership. However, unlike Abydos, where power was consolidated and military forces well organized, the northern leaders such as the Bull's Head King remained fragmented across small communities. Despite their resources and trade connections, Lower Egypt lacked a unified political center capable of repelling the southern advance. These leaders thus appeared only as scattered voices of resistance, ultimately swept away by Upper Egypt's conquest. Before Narmer, history records another key figure, King Scorpion II. He is seen as a forerunner of Egypt's unification process, laying the groundwork for Narmer's eventual campaign. The clearest evidence of this is the scorpion mace head, a ceremonial artifact discovered at Hierakonpolis. It depicts the king holding a hoe during a ritual of canal cutting, an act symbolizing land cultivation, governance, and the granting of life. However, many scholars argue that the image also conveys political meaning. It represents military victory and territorial expansion into the north, especially since the same artifact includes depictions of captives and symbols of submission. During Scorpion II's reign, southern forces had already penetrated deep into the northern delta. He controlled key river routes, ports, and trade hubs. Yet, his power was not sufficient to impose full dominance over Lower Egypt. In other words, Scorpion II had extended southern influence and sown the seeds of unification, but he was not the one to complete it. Upon his death, power passed to his successors at Abydos, forming the foundation for Narmer to launch the final campaign that would defeat the north entirely and make him the first pharaoh in Egyptian history. After King Scorpion II's groundwork, Upper Egypt was strong enough to carry out a decisive campaign. The man who led that campaign was Narmer, the chieftain of Abydos, often regarded as the first pharaoh in history. Narmer inherited a solid foundation. Upper Egypt had already been unified under the Tenite dynasty. The military was organized, the economy was prosperous, and, crucially, the South had already gained experience in conquering the North under Scorpion. Narmer mobilized a powerful force, combining military strength with religious and political symbolism to assert his supremacy. The direct evidence of this campaign is the Narmer Palette, a ceremonial slate artifact regarded as a chronicle of that historic moment. On one side, Narmer is depicted wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, with a raised mace poised to strike a kneeling enemy, an image symbolizing the South's conquest of the North. On the reverse, he wears a red crown of Lower Egypt, overseeing a procession of bound captives under the watchful eye of the gods. This is a declaration. Narmer had become the ruler of both lands, uniting the country for the first time in history. The significance of the Narmer Palette extends far beyond its artistic value. It is a political proclamation in visual form, marking the birth of centralized kingship. The king was no longer just a military leader, but a sacred figure connected to the divine and wielding absolute power over unified Egypt. Following this campaign, Narmer established his capital at Memphis, located at the junction between North and South, a strategic site for controlling both the Delta and the Nile Valley. This moment marked the end of the pre-dynastic period, the beginning of the early dynastic period, and the dawn of a unified Egyptian civilization. Around the beginning of the 3rd millennium BCE, Egypt emerged from the shadows of the pre-dynastic period and stepped into a new era, the early dynastic period, lasting from 3100 to 2686 BCE. This was a foundational age, when the first pharaohs transformed a once divided land into a unified nation, establishing Memphis as the capital to govern both Upper and Lower Egypt. During this time, the core elements of Egyptian identity were forged. Hieroglyphs evolved beyond symbolic signs into an administrative language. Tombs at Abydos and Saqqara developed into first mastabas. Royal rituals began to standardize, and the pharaoh was deified as a living embodiment of Horus. Kings like Narmer, Horah, Jur, and Den did more than leave their names on stelae and tombs. They etched themselves into the very structure of society, from the foundations of the bureaucratic system and a taxation apparatus to the use of imagery as a tool for projecting royal power. This was a period of great experimentation, during which a theocratic political cultural empire took shape, preparing the way for the glorious pyramid age of the Old Kingdom. Narmer, often identified with Menes, who ruled for about 50 years, laid the groundwork for the Pharaonic dynasty. After unifying Upper and Lower Egypt, he established Memphis as the capital, precisely where the valley meets the delta, allowing for effective control over both regions. Here, a rudimentary administrative structure was formed, responsible for managing grain storage, land, and labor forces. For Narmer, power came not only from weaponry, but also from divine association. He linked himself to the god Horus, transforming the pharaoh into a divine king, the foundation of Egypt's future theocracy. Narmer married Nithotep, a princess of Upper Egypt, thereby consolidating royal power. She is believed to have been the mother of Horah, his successor. Horah, son of Narmer and Nithotep, ascended the throne after his father's death, around 3100 BCE. He strengthened Memphis. Artifacts bearing hieroglyphs on wooden labels and clay seals show that the state had begun operating a system for recording grain and land. Evidence of early administrative writing. Trade expanded. Ships from Memphis sailed south to Nubia for gold and ivory, and across desert routes to the Near East in exchange for copper and cedar. Funerary practices evolved. Tombs at Abydos grew larger. These were not merely burial places, but ceremonial spaces where the living affirmed the pharaoh's immortality. Horah is also believed to have established a temple to the goddess Neith at Sais, reflecting the blend of political and religious authority. The tomb of Nithotep and Nakata was also monumental, indicating her status as a founding queen, honored on par with royalty. Horah had several descendants, among whom Jur is recorded as a successor. Jur ascended the throne at a relatively young age, around 3050 BCE. His reign is marked by the construction of complex tombs at Abydos, accompanied by hundreds of subsidiary burials. This is clear evidence that royal power had far surpassed that of tribal chieftains. The pharaoh had become a divine figure who required a retinue even in death. Jur's wife, Herneth, was buried at Saqqara in a large mastaba, indicating the rising influence of royal women. After Jur's death, the throne passed to his son, Jet. Jet, son of Jur and Herneth, inherited the throne around 3000 BCE. He is remembered through a stela bearing the image of serpent, one of the earliest royal names written in hieroglyphs. His wife, Princess Merneth, was likely the mother of his successor, Den. Following Jet's death, the throne passed to Merneth, his wife and mother of the crown, Prince Denver. Although not always listed among official pharaohs, archaeological evidence shows that Merneth ruled as a true queen regent. While her son was still young, she governed in his place, actively managing the state. Administrative seals bearing her name, along with her large tomb at Abydos, comparable in scale to those of male kings and surrounded by subsidiary burials, demonstrate that both society and religion in Egypt accepted royal women as sovereigns. This set a critical precedent, paving the way for future female pharaohs. From Merneth's time onward, royal funerary rituals began to standardize. Tombs were no longer just burial chambers, but ritual spaces affirming the divine nature of kingship. When Den, son of Merneth and Jet, came of age, he assumed the throne and became one of the most powerful rulers of the first dynasty, around 2990 BCE. Under his rule, Egypt was unified and stabilized to an unprecedented degree. Den was the first pharaoh to fully bear the title king of Upper and Lower Egypt, formalizing not only the practical unification of the land, but its political and symbolic unity as well. Art from his reign includes significant depictions, such as scenes of Den performing the said festival, a ritual held after many years of rule to renew the king's power, affirming that the pharaoh was not just a mortal leader, but one ordained by the cosmic order of Ma'at. His tomb at Abydos features stairways leading to multiple burial chambers and contain a vast array of grave goods, an architectural advancement foreshadowing the grand mastabas, and, eventually, the pyramids. During Den's reign, the administrative system and hieroglyphic writing reached new sophistication. Writing was now used not only for religious events, but for recording local names, taxes, and economic management. After Den, the final kings of the first dynasty, Anagib, Semerkhet, and Qa, ruled toward the end of the 30th century BC. They inherited the throne from Den's lineage, but the royal court began to show signs of instability. Anagib struggled to maintain his grip on power. Semerkhet ascended amid signs of internal conflict, and some king lists report that the country faced crisis during this period. Even so, their reigns did not signal total collapse. Artistry in ivory, bone carving, administrative seals, and the hieroglyphic system continued to evolve, serving the management of grain stores, land, and state rituals. These traces suggest that despite courtly upheaval, the royal bureaucracy and cultural institutions continue to function effectively, laying the groundwork for the continuity of the Second Dynasty. When Qa, the last king of the First Dynasty, died, the throne passed to a new royal line, ushering in Dynasty II. This transition was not without unrest, but it maintained the continuity of Egyptian kingship. Looking back, from Merneth to Qa, the First Dynasty affirmed a foundational principle. The pharaoh was the absolute center of Egypt's political, religious, and cultural life. And even amid fluctuations in dynastic strength, belief in the divine kingship remained a unifying thread that held ancient Egypt together. Following the turmoil at the end of the First Dynasty, Egypt's throne passed into the hands of a new royal line, Hotep II. The founding king of the Second Dynasty ascended the throne around 2890 BC. His name, meaning the two powers are at peace, is believed to symbolize the restoration of stability after earlier conflict. During his reign, royal rituals were expanded, and ceremonies linking the pharaoh with the god Horus became increasingly standardized. He also laid the foundations of the development of funerary architecture at Saqqara, where the mastabas of officials gradually grew into massive mud-brick structures, reflecting the growing opulence and visibility of the elite bureaucracy. His successor, Ranab, also known as Nebra, marked a major turning point in Egyptian religion. On surviving seal impressions and inscriptions, Ranab was the first pharaoh to associate his royal titulary with the sun god Ra. This represents the earliest known step in Egypt's shift from local cults to a centralized national religion centered around solar worship, paving the way for the rise of the sun cult in the Old Kingdom. Under Ranab's reign, the state continued to strengthen its administration and expand religious rituals that tied Pharaoh's authority to the cosmic order of Ma'at. After Ranab, the throne passed to Ninetcher, one of the longest reigning monarchs of the Second Dynasty. During his extended reign, Egypt's trade networks expanded significantly. The kingdom maintained active exchanges with Nubia, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Near East. Artifacts from his time reveal that the administration was functioning efficiently, with officials overseeing provinces, grain storage, and religious festivals. However, toward the end of his reign, Egypt showed signs of instability. Some records suggest that the country may have split into two distinct centers of power. This was the first time since Narmer that Egypt's political unity appeared to falter. This period of upheaval reached its peak during the reign of Peribsen. On surviving monuments, Peribsen caused shock by abandoning the Horus falcon, the traditional symbol of pharaonic kingship, and adopting a royal title linked to Seth. Seth, the god of the desert, chaos, and war, was traditionally viewed as Horus's cosmic rival. Peribsen's alignment with Seth signaled a profound shift, both religious and political. It may reflect regional tensions, internal divisions, or even a crisis of divine authority. This was a pivotal moment, demonstrating that even in its formative years, the institution of kingship in Egypt was not immune to religious and political disputes. Following Peribsen's reign, Egypt descended into internal strife, until Khayskemwy restored unity. His throne name incorporated both Horus and Seth, symbolizing reconciliation after civil discord. This is the only instance in Egyptian history where a pharaoh explicitly associated himself with both deities, traditionally seen as opposites, as a statement of his dominion over all Egypt. Khayskemwy is also remembered for his architectural achievements. He initiated large-scale stone constructions at Hierakonpolis and Abydos, marking the first steps toward the stone pyramids of the Old Kingdom. His tomb at Abydos, Shunet el-Zebib, remains one of the largest surviving mud brick structures of ancient Egypt. It is considered a direct architectural predecessor of the step pyramids that would soon emerge. Khayskemwy's reign not only marked the end of Egypt's early period of turmoil, but also laid the foundation for the glorious Old Kingdom, where centralized power and architectural mastery reached unprecedented heights. When Khayskemwy, the last king of the Second Dynasty, passed away, Egypt had just emerged from a period of civil war and fragmentation. He had restored peace by unifying the North and South. But with his death, the country required a new dynasty to maintain stability. It was at this turning point that the Third Dynasty began, marking the transition from an era of experimentation to a new epoch that posterity would call the Old Kingdom. This was a time when kingship no longer rested solely on military strength, but on absolute divine authority. The pharaoh was no longer seen as a tribal leader or temporary ruler, but as the earthly embodiment of the god Horus, the guardian of Ma'at, the cosmic order and divine justice. The administrative apparatus expanded. Officials oversaw grain storage, land management workshops, and religious festivals. A powerful class of nobles and priests began to emerge under the royal court, laying the foundation for a complex, centralized society. Trade flourished. Ships ventured into Sinai to procure copper and turquoise, down to Nubia for gold and ivory, and across the Near East to obtain cedar wood and resin. Agriculture remained the backbone of the economy, supported by irrigation canals and granaries that ensured surplus production to sustain the army, state construction projects, and the elite. The most defining feature of this period was the transformation in architecture and funerary practices. Whereas pharaohs had previously been buried in mud brick mastabas, limestone now became the primary building material. This marked a leap not only in engineering, but also in ideology. No longer content with perishable structures, the Egyptians sought to create eternal monuments, constructions as everlasting as the pharaoh himself. The third dynasty of Egypt began with King Djoser, circa 2670 BCE, also known as Neterkit. He is widely believed to have been the son of Kheskemwy and Queen Nimethat, a powerful woman who played a key role in the transition between the second and third dynasties. As such, Djoser was more than just a pharaoh. He embodied the legitimate continuation of both royal lines, securing political unity for the nation. Senakti or Nebka is sometimes listed as the first ruler of the third dynasty in king lists, but his actual existence remains uncertain. Aside from a few seal fragments and inscriptions scattered at Baikalof, no conclusive evidence of a reign under his name has been found. Ancient records like the Turin Canon and the writings of Manetho mention Senakti, but his placement and role are inconsistent, and he may have been confused with another ruler entirely. To this day, no pyramid or confirmed tomb has been linked to him, leading many scholars to conclude that if he did exist, his reign must have been brief, merely a shadow before Djoser truly ushered the third dynasty into the age of the immortal pyramids. Under Djoser's rule, Memphis was solidified as the center of political power. There, he developed an increasingly structured administrative system. Officials were appointed to oversee grain storage, land festivals, and the army. From this point forward, the image of the pharaoh evolved, not merely a military commander, but a supreme manager of the state's economic, religious, and civic operations. Economically, Egypt under Djoser experienced sufficient prosperity to embark on massive building projects. Archaeological evidence shows Egypt traded extensively. Gold and ivory were imported from Nubia, copper and turquoise from Sinai, and cedar and resin from the Near East, resources not found locally. Agriculture, still dependent on the Nile's flood cycle, continued to yield enough surplus to sustain not only the population, but also a growing bureaucracy, labor force, and military. In the realm of religion, Djoser was viewed as the keeper of Ma'at, the divine order responsible for maintaining harmony among humans, gods, and nature. During his reign, the priesthood took on an increasingly central role in organizing festivals and upholding the sacred order. It was in this context that the name Imhotep emerged, a high official, architect, priest, and physician who elevated funerary architecture to unprecedented heights. Imhotep would later be deified as a god of medicine and wisdom, one of the rare cases in Egyptian history where a mortal was elevated to divine status. Art and culture under Djoser also reached a new level of sophistication. Limestone wall reliefs began to show structured compositions, accurate proportions, and intricate detail. Hieroglyphic writing, which had previously been limited, was now regularly inscribed on stelae seals, used not only for ceremonial purposes, but also for administrative records. This marked a significant evolution. Writing had become an essential tool in state governance, no longer confined to ritual use. The culmination of Djoser's reign was the step pyramid at Saqqara, a marvel of human ingenuity. Prior to this, pharaohs were buried in mud brick mastabas, flat-roofed, rectangular tombs vulnerable to erosion over time. But through the vision and engineering brilliance of Imhotep, who served simultaneously as architect, high priest, physician, and scholar, the mastaba was transformed into an unprecedented achievement. A 60-meter tall stone pyramid, rising toward the heavens like a divine staircase linking Pharaoh to the gods. Initially, Djoser only intended to build a single-tiered stone mastaba, a groundbreaking innovation in itself. But Imhotep boldly expanded the design, from one level to 2, then 3, and eventually 6 tiers, each smaller than the one below, forming the world's first pyramid. The result was not merely a tomb, but a stone proclamation of the pharaoh's eternal power. Surrounding the pyramid was no simple structure, but a vast funerary complex spanning over 15 hectares, enclosed by a 10-meter-high limestone wall. Within the enclosure lay the Hebsed Court, the ritual arena for Pharaoh's rejuvenation ceremonies, temples for offerings, granaries, storerooms, and stone replicas of royal palaces, meant to recreate the entire kingdom for Djoser in the afterlife. Beneath the sacred ground, Imhotep designed a labyrinth of underground galleries and corridors, stretching for kilometers into the bedrock of Saqqara. Within these chambers, archaeologists found thousands of stone vessels inscribed with the names of earlier pharaohs, indicating Djoser's desire to present himself as a legitimate heir of Egypt's ancient legacy. The main burial chamber, where the king's mummy was placed, was lined with granite, an exceptionally hard stone transported from distant Aswan in southern Egypt. What is astonishing is that the entire structure was built in the 27th century BC, more than 4,600 years ago, in an era without steel tools, wheels, or modern pulleys. Tens of thousands of limestone blocks, each weighing several tons, were cut, transported, and assembled with precision, creating an eternal monument. The step pyramid of Saqqara was not merely Djoser's tomb. It was a cornerstone of the Pyramid Age. From that moment on, each pharaoh saw the construction of a stone pyramid as a sacred duty, a visible sign of divine kingship and immortality. And from that moment, the name Imhotep entered legend, not only as an architect, but as the first man to turn stone into a symbol of eternity, worshipped as the god of intellect and creativity. After Djoser's glorious reign, the throne passed to Sekhemkhet, circa 2660 BC, believed to be either his son or grandson. His reign was short, lasting around 6 to 7 years, so the legacy he left behind was less monumental. Yet it is precisely this brevity that makes the surviving monuments all the more remarkable, as they reflect the ongoing ambition of Third Dynasty rulers to carry forward the legacy of Djoser's step pyramid. Politically and socially, Egypt under Sekhemkhet remained stable. Memphis continued to function as a capital, with a well-structured administration and priesthood playing key roles. The economy remained robust, supported by agriculture and trade with Nubia, Sinai, and the Near East, ensuring the resources needed for construction projects. In religion, the pharaoh was still viewed as the embodiment of Horus and the guardian of Ma'at, with divine rituals continuing uninterrupted. The art of the time, particularly in small objects of ivory, bone, and stone, reveals that refined craftsmanship continued to flourish. The major architectural work linked to Sekhemkhet is the buried pyramid at Saqqara, designed by Imhotep and intended to surpass Djoser's pyramid in height. However, Sekhemkhet's early death left the project unfinished. Despite this, the very attempt shows that stone pyramid construction had become the expected standard for pharaohs, regardless of the length of their reign. Kaaba succeeded Sekhemkhet around 2650 BC. His reign, though brief, was marked by continuity and stability. Centralized administration was maintained. Trade with Nubia, Sinai, and the Near East continued, and agriculture thrived. Stone quarrying expanded to support building efforts. His reign is distinguished by the layer pyramid at Zayat el-Aryan. Though incomplete, this structure illustrates a new architectural experiment in pyramid design, distinct from both the step pyramid at Saqqara and the buried pyramid. The final king of the Third Dynasty, Huni, circa 2630 to 2613 BC, is often believed to be the father of Sneferu. Unlike his predecessors, he is notable for a series of small pyramids scattered across Egypt, from the Delta to Upper Egypt. These structures were likely not tombs, but may have had ritual or political significance, symbolizing the pharaoh's presence and authority across the land. Additionally, under Huni, relief sculpture and small statues reached a new level of refinement, while hieroglyphic writing became more standardized for administrative use. These architectural experiments and cultural advancements laid the direct foundation for Sneferu, founder of the Fourth Dynasty, to inaugurate the most magnificent era of pyramid building in ancient Egyptian history. With the beginning of the Fourth Dynasty, 2613 to 2494 BC, Egypt entered the most glorious phase of the Old Kingdom, an era later known as the Pyramid Age. While the Third Dynasty had merely experimented with Saqqara and several unfinished structures, by this time, engineering had matured, pharaonic power reached its zenith, and the country's wealth was poured into unprecedented monumental projects. This was the age of king architects, beginning with Sneferu, who built the first smooth-sided pyramid, followed by Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, names forever tied to the eternal grandeur of Giza, the immortal symbol of Egypt. These were not merely tombs. They were stone proclamations of the pharaoh's immortality, testaments to a society capable of mobilizing tens of thousands of laborers, extracting resources from across the Nile Valley and organizing an entire state around one singular will: the eternity of the king. The Fourth Dynasty marked an era in which pharaonic authority became absolutely centralized. The king was no longer just a political leader, but the living embodiment of the divine on earth. Every aspect of society revolved around the pharaoh. Beneath him was a tightly organized bureaucracy. The vizier held supreme administrative authority, acting on behalf of the king in matters of storage, land, and construction. Nomarchs governed the individual provinces, nomes, managing taxation and labor recruitment, but they remained under strict supervision from Memphis, the central capital. The priesthood also rose in importance, directly managing temples and religious rituals, further strengthening the divine legitimacy of the monarchy. Meanwhile, the nobility and royal family grew wealthier. The enormous mastabas at Giza and Saqqara were not just tombs, but displays of elite privilege and power. The Fourth Dynasty's prosperity was rooted in Nile-based agriculture, supported by an intricate network of canals, reservoirs, and the river's stable flood cycle. Farmers cultivated wheat, barley, and flax, raised livestock, and supplied the kingdom's food reserves, stored in royal granaries. Beyond subsistence, international trade expanded. Egypt imported gold, ivory, and animal hides from Nubia, copper and turquoise from Sinai, and cedar, resin, and precious stones from Lebanon and the Near East. This wealth enabled the monarchy to mobilize tens of thousands of workers, farmers during the off-season, along with skilled craftsmen, to construct the colossal pyramid complexes. Such manpower mobilization reflects a surplus-driven economy capable of sustaining not just a bureaucracy and military, but also vast, long-term construction projects. The Fourth Dynasty also marked the peak of the pharaoh's divine identity as Horus incarnate, and for the first time, the king adopted the title Son of Ra. The solar cult, previously emerging, now became the cornerstone of state religion. The smooth-sided pyramids, unlike the earlier step forms, rose like rays of stone sunlight, symbolizing the pharaoh's connection to the sun god Ra. The priesthood of Ra became an increasingly powerful institution, organizing state rituals and reinforcing the sacred foundation of royal authority. Art in the Fourth Dynasty reached an extraordinary level of refinement. Statues of pharaohs carved from diorite granite and basalt displayed solemn, immortal features, while group sculptures, such as Menkaure with his queen, revealed a humanizing and intimate touch. Reliefs in temples and tombs depicted processions, rituals, craftsmen, and daily life, functioning both as works of art and as historical records. In architecture, pyramid construction underwent a dramatic evolution, from experimental designs like Mitam and the Bent Pyramid, to the fully realized Red Pyramid of Sneferu, and ultimately reaching its zenith in the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza. For the first time in human history, stone structures made of millions of precisely fitted blocks were constructed on a massive scale, becoming eternal symbols of Egyptian civilization. Writing also became more standardized and widely used. Royal annals carved in stone recorded military campaigns, construction efforts, and festivals. Hieroglyphs appeared on stele, seals, grain records, and administrative documents. The frequent use of writing demonstrates a highly professional and complex state apparatus, deeply reliant on literacy for governance. Sneferu, the founding king of the Fourth Dynasty, who ruled from approximately 2613 to 2589 BC, is praised by later generations as the Architect King, for he left an indelible mark on the architectural history of ancient Egypt. If Djoser was the first to construct a step pyramid in stone, then Sneferu was the one who transformed it into the first smooth-sided pyramid, inaugurating an age of eternal monuments. During his nearly 25-year reign, Sneferu commissioned 3 large pyramids, each representing a leap in engineering and conceptual thinking. Located at the edge of the desert near Fayum, the Mitam Pyramid is often called a collapsed pyramid due to its current unusual shape, a square core standing stark and alone amid the sands. Yet behind its ruin lies a major architectural milestone. This was the first time Egyptian builders attempted to transform a step pyramid into a true smooth-sided pyramid. When newly completed, Mitam stood around 92 meters high, with a square base measuring 144 by 144 meters, making it one of the tallest structures of its time. Today, due to partial collapse, it reaches only about 65 meters, exposing the internal step core. Originally begun at the end of the Third Dynasty, possibly under Huni, the structure was first designed as a 7-step mastaba, later expanded to 8. When Sneferu ascended the throne, he ordered it converted into a smooth pyramid by adding white limestone casing to flatten the steps. It was a bold innovation but fraught with risk. The outer casing was laid directly over sand and rubble instead of on a solid foundation. The result was structural instability. Over time, the casing slipped and collapsed. Archaeologists debate whether the collapse occurred during construction or shortly after completion. Unlike earlier, simpler mastabas, Midam featured a relatively complex internal layout. The entrance, placed high on the northern face, led through a passage over 60 meters long to the burial chamber. The chamber, made of limestone, used sloping blocks and timber beams to support the roof, a primitive version of the corbelled ceiling technique seen in later pyramids. However, the design remained rudimentary, lacking the refinement of Sneferu's subsequent projects. Though a technical failure, Midam represents the first attempt to shift from stepped to smooth pyramid design, setting the stage for major advancements at Dashur. Lessons from Midam regarding angle, foundation, and stone arrangement laid the groundwork for the bent pyramid and red pyramid. For this reason, archaeologists regard Midam as a laboratory of pyramid architecture. Despite its unfinished state, it stands as proof of the bold experimentation, trial and error, and determination of the ancient Egyptians in their quest to build eternal wonders. After the collapse at Midam, Sneferu did not stop. He ordered the construction of a new pyramid at Dashur, south of modern-day Cairo. This structure, later known as the Bent Pyramid, became one of the most unique architectural marvels in Egypt, being the only pyramid in history with 2 distinct slope angles. The original plan called for a pyramid 129 meters high, with a square base of 189 by 189 meters, comparable in size to the later pyramids at Giza. In reality, it was completed at 105 meters in height. Its distinctive bent shape resulted from a construction error. The lower half was built at a steep 54 degrees angle, which proved too heavy for the foundation. When the structure reached about 47 meters, signs of cracking and subsidence appeared. To prevent collapse, architects adjusted the upper slope to 43 degrees, creating the unusual but graceful bent profile. Perhaps the most valuable feature of the bent pyramid is its 2 raw white limestone casing. Unlike most pyramids, which lost their outer layers over time, this structure still retains much of its original casing, allowing us to glimpse the brilliant luminosity the pyramid once radiated under the Egyptian sun. When newly built, the entire pyramid likely gleamed like a ray of stone sunlight, in keeping with the solar symbolism of the era. The internal structure of the bent pyramid is also unique. Rather than a single entrance on the north face, as was customary, it has 2 entrances, one on the north and another on the west. Each leads to a separate burial chamber, both with corbelled ceilings supported by wooden beams. Archaeologists believe the original plan may have intended to merge these 2 systems into one central chamber, but the project was left partially unfinished. Though it did not achieve its initial goal, the bent pyramid remains a marvel of adaptability. It shows that ancient Egyptian architects did not abandon a flawed project, but instead adjusted and adapted to preserve its structural integrity. This process of trial, correction, and innovation helped them build the expertise that led to the resounding success of the next pyramid. Today, the Bent Pyramid is not only a testimony to early engineering, but also the only pyramid to retain much of its original outer casing, offering us a rare glimpse into the original radiant beauty of Egyptian pyramids. It stands as vivid evidence that before reaching perfection at Giza, the Egyptians embarked on a bold, creative journey of experimentation. Having learned from the collapse at Midam and the mid-course corrections of the Bent Pyramid, Sneferu and his architects finally applied all those lessons to build the first fully successful, smooth-sided pyramid in history, the Red Pyramid at Dashur. This was a decisive turning point, bringing the pyramid's form to eternal perfection, the true standard of Egypt's architectural legacy. The Red Pyramid, located not far from the Bent Pyramid, stands in Dashur, the new royal necropolis of the Fourth Dynasty. Rising to a height of 105 meters, with a square base measuring 220 by 220 meters and a total volume of nearly 1.7 million cubic meters of stone. It is one of the largest pyramids in Egypt. More importantly, it is considered the first truly completed smooth-sided pyramid in history. Today, it is called the Red Pyramid due to the pale reddish limestone blocks that glow under the Egyptian sun, giving it a distinct red hue. Originally, however, it was fully encased in gleaming white Tura limestone, visible from dozens of kilometers away, shining like a beacon in the desert. Most of this outer casing was stripped away during the Middle Ages, repurposed for building homes and mosques in Cairo, leaving behind the red stone core we see today. After the bent pyramid was forced to change its slope mid-construction due to structural instability, Sneferu's architects chose from the outset a much safer 43 degrees incline, significantly less steep than the 54 degrees used previously. This decision allowed the colossal stone mass to remain structurally sound for over 4,000 years. Entrance, located on the north face, approximately 28 meters above ground level. Passageway, a descending corridor nearly 60 meters long, leading to a complex of 3 burial chambers. The burial chambers include the first 2 chambers, a line along the passage, have vaulted ceilings nearly 12 meters high, constructed using corbelled masonry, a technique where successive stone layers are laid increasingly inward to form a pseudo-vault capable of bearing significant weight. The third chamber, likely intended as a main burial chamber, lies deeper within the pyramid, a line perpendicular to the main corridor, and is notably spacious and structurally robust. Outside the pyramid, the structure is surrounded by subsidiary buildings, a mortuary temple, storage rooms, and an enclosure wall, though these lack the monumental scale of the pyramid complex built later by Sneferu's son, Khufu, at Giza. The Red Pyramid is widely regarded as the official final resting place of Sneferu, the king who inaugurated the age of smooth-sided pyramids. With this construction, the Egyptians proved they had fully mastered the techniques of pyramid building, from foundations and slope design to internal chamber systems. More importantly, the Red Pyramid served as the architectural prototype for all subsequent pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza built by Sneferu's son, Khufu. It also demonstrated the extraordinary logistical capabilities of the Egyptian state. Tens of thousands of workers, over many years, quarried, transported, and precisely assembled millions of stone blocks, each weigh between 2 and 15 tons, with a level of precision that continues to astound modern engineers. Following Sneferu, the architect king who transformed the pyramid concept into architectural reality, the throne passed his son, Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, who reigned for over 20 years. If Sneferu laid the foundation, then Khufu elevated that vision to its highest realization, producing the greatest structure of ancient Egyptian civilization, the Great Pyramid of Giza, the only surviving wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. On a high plateau in Giza, west of the Nile River, Khufu commissioned construction of the Great Pyramid, a colossal edifice rising to 146 meters, with each side of its square base measuring 230 meters, and built from 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, totaling nearly 6.5 million tons of material. For nearly 4 millennia, it stood as the tallest human-made structure in the world, and it remains the last surviving wonder of antiquity. The Great Pyramid of Giza was not only massive, but also built with astonishing precision. Its 4 base sides are nearly perfect squares, deviating by only a few centimeters. The entire structure is aligned almost exactly with the 4 cardinal directions, with discrepancy of less than 0.05 degrees. Originally, the exterior was clad in polished white Tura limestone, causing the pyramid to gleam under the Egyptian sun like a ray of stone-born light. Inside, the pyramid houses a uniquely complex internal system. A descending passage leads to an unfinished subterranean chamber carved into the bedrock. The Queen's chamber lies deep within the pyramid's core, and the King's chamber, the main burial room, is constructed from red granite transported from Aswan, 800 kilometers to the south. The chamber ceiling is supported by layered, relieving chambers, a brilliant architectural innovation designed to distribute the immense weight of the structure above. Narrow shafts extend from these chambers toward the sky, believed to be sole passages guiding the pharaoh to the stars, symbols of eternal life. Surrounding the pyramid is a vast funerary complex. Subsidiary pyramids for queens, mortuary temples, ceremonial causeways, and solar boat pits, including one excavated vessel over 40 meters long, underscoring the aspiration to ferry the pharaoh into the afterlife. Behind Khufu's name lies another critical figure, rarely mentioned but essential: Himeyinu, vizier, grandson of Sneferu, and widely regarded as the chief architect of the Great Pyramid. Holding the highest position beneath the pharaoh, he oversaw the entire project and coordinated the massive bureaucratic machine required to complete it. To construct this monument, Khufu and Himeyinu implemented a nationwide organizational system. Tens of thousands of laborers, mainly farmers conscripted during the Nile's flood season when farmland lay underwater, along with skilled craftsmen, engineers, and priests, worked continuously for nearly 2 decades. Contrary to popular myth, they were not slaves, but organized and compensated workers. Their daily rations included 4 to 5 liters of beer, several loaves of bread, and portions of beef or mutton, sufficient to sustain them through grueling labor. They lived in mud brick worker camps, equipped with communal kitchens, storage facilities, and even makeshift clinics. They worked in organized teams under foremen. Highly skilled artisans were often rewarded with land or valuable goods. The natural rhythms of the Nile made it possible for Egypt to mobilize such a massive labor force for its eternal monuments. Construction materials came from across the region. Limestone was quarried locally at Giza. Granite was brought from Aswan 800 kilometers away. Cedarwood and resin were imported from Lebanon to build rafts for transporting blocks along the Nile. Stone blocks weighing several tons were hauled on sleds, lubricated with water or mud, and dragged up earthen ramps. Though the exact techniques remain a mystery, one thing is certain: to raise the Great Pyramid, all of Egypt functioned like a single, unified engine serving the pharaoh, from peasant farmers and artisans to priests and state officials. For Khufu, pharaonic power reached its most divinely exalted form. No longer merely ruler of men, the pharaoh was now the embodiment of Horus, the son of Ra, the supreme sun god. The Great Pyramid stood as a stone proclamation of this belief, a man-made mountain piercing the sky, affirming the pharaoh's immortality and eternal oneness with the cosmos. Yet Khufu's reign left behind a dual legacy. On one hand, it marked the pinnacle of organizational, architectural, and religious achievement. On the other, the immense burden such monuments impose on a populace may have sown seeds of future unrest. Nevertheless, the Great Pyramid of Giza has stood unshaken for over 4,500 years, an irreplaceable symbol of the strength, intellect, and eternal ambition of Egypt's old kingdom. After the death of Khufu, the throne did not pass immediately to his designated heir, but instead shifted to another branch of the royal family. Jedefra, 2566 to 2558 BCE, the son of Khufu and one of his lesser queens, possibly Meritites Ai or Henutsyn, ascended to the throne. He was likely not the originally appointed successor. This role may have belonged to another son of Khufu, but somehow Jedefra seized power. This has led modern historians to believe that his reign rested on the foundations of a lingering succession dispute. Interestingly, it was during this period that one of Egypt's most iconic symbols emerged: the Great Sphinx of Giza. Some 19th century scholars theorize that Jedefra had built the Sphinx to honor his father Khufu, especially since Jedefra located his royal complex at Abu Roash, separate from the Giza necropolis. This theory was supported by fragmentary records and the fact that Jedefra was the first pharaoh to adopt the title Son of Ra, directly linking the king with the sun god, an association highly consistent with the Sphinx, a symbol of the rising sun in the east. However, archaeological evidence today largely favors Khafre, 2558 to 2532 BCE, either the full or half-brother Jedefra and another son of Khufu. The strongest evidence lies in precise alignment between the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid and adjoining temples. Many of the limestone blocks used in construction of the Sphinx also match the blocks from Khafre's pyramid, suggesting both structures were built nearly simultaneously. As a result, most modern historians agree that Khafre commissioned the Sphinx around 2550 BCE. The Great Sphinx of Giza remains one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world. Carved from a single massive limestone outcrop on the Giza Plateau, the statue measures 73 meters long and 20 meters high. featuring the powerful body of a lion and the majestic face of a pharaoh. The ancient Egyptians believed it to be the embodiment of Horus of the horizon, the god of the rising sun, both protector of the Giza complex and eternal witness to the pharaoh's divine authority. Originally, the Sphinx's face was painted red. It wore the striped Neme's headdress in blue and gold and bore the uraeus, a sacred cobra, on its brow, symbolizing supreme kingship. The statue faces directly east, toward the rising sun, as if to guard the perpetual rebirth of the sun god Ra. In front of the statue lies the Sphinx temple, constructed from the very blocks quarried during the carving of the Sphinx's body. Together with Khafre's pyramid and its associated temples, the Sphinx forms a complete ritual axis, where the pharaoh was sanctified in direct connection with the sun god. But who exactly is the face of the Sphinx? This question has sparked debate for centuries. Some theories propose that the statue represents Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid, and that it was erected by Jedefra to honor his father. This view is based on Jedefra's adoption of the title Son of Ra, which strongly fits the solar symbolism of the Sphinx. However, archaeological evidence continues to point elsewhere to Khafre. The stones of the Sphinx temple in Khafre's Valley Temple match the limestone extracted during the Sphinx's carving. Their alignment with Khafre's pyramid further confirms that all were part of a unified project. Comparative facial analysis between the Sphinx and statues of Khafre also reveal a greater resemblance than with Khufu. Thus, the prevailing consensus among scholars today is that the Sphinx is a portrait of Khafre, constructed around 2550 BC to guard his tomb and affirm the pharaoh as a living embodiment of Horati. Yet, the absence of definitive inscriptions means the debate remains open, an enduring mystery that only deepens the statue's mystique. Over the millennia, the Sphinx has endured desert winds and countless sandstorms, often buried up to its shoulders. The ancient Greeks were awestruck by its presence, and Egyptians of the late period referred to it reverently as Hormake, Horus in the horizon. The statue bears scars. Its great nose is broken, possibly destroyed during the medieval period, and the once attached ceremonial beard broke off, with fragments now housed in the British Museum. Several later pharaohs ordered restorations, the most famous being Thutmose IV. As a prince, he is said to have slept beneath the Sphinx and dreamed that the god promised him the throne if he cleared away the sand. That dream was immortalized on the dream stele, a granite tablet placed between the statue's front paws, testament to the sacred aura the Sphinx has always held. Standing adjacent to Khufu's Great Pyramid, Khafre's pyramid rises with regal elegance, reinforcing Giza as the stage of dynastic power. Though smaller than his father's masterpiece, originally 143.5 meters high, with 215-meter-long sides, Khafre's pyramid appears more imposing due to its higher elevation and its retention of the original white limestone casing at the summit. Its interior is simpler than that of Khufu's. Two descending passageways lead to the central burial chamber, constructed with massive granite blocks and housing a dark diorite sarcophagus. During his reign, Khafre upheld his father's tradition of centralized power. He retained Memphis as a political and administrative capital and strengthened royal authority by placing nomarchs, provincial governors, under close surveillance by the royal court. As a result, taxes, agricultural production, and manpower from the provinces flowed directly to the royal household, ensuring a stable system with little to no internal strife during his rule. After the death of Khafre, the throne of Egypt did not immediately pass to Menkaure, as commonly recounted, but instead underwent a brief turning point. Baka, the son of Jedefra, seized the throne and ruled for less than a year. This fleeting reign left behind virtually no monuments or political achievements, serving primarily as a reflection of the internal power struggle within Khufu's lineage between the branch of Jedefra and that of Khafre. This interruption was quickly resolved when power returned to the main line. Menkaure, son of Khafre, ascended the throne. Though the pyramid he left behind is the smallest of the Giza trio, Menkaure's reign stands out as a unique chapter of artistry and humanism in ancient Egypt. Menkaure's pyramid originally stood at approximately 65 meters, only about half the height of Khufu's Great Pyramid, with a base length of 108 meters. Modest in scale, the structure was nonetheless meticulously crafted. Its lower section was clad in pink granite from Aswan, while the upper portion was finished in white limestone, creating a striking contrast. Alongside the main pyramid were three smaller pyramids for his queens, evidence of continued familial bonds reflected in royal funerary architecture. This was Giza's final effort to conclude the golden age of monumental pyramid building. What set Menkaure apart as a pharaoh was not just his architecture, but also his approach to royal sculpture. The most famous example is the statue group of Menkaure and Queen Khmer II. The king stands upright in traditional striding pose, but unlike earlier depictions, his presence is no longer distant or austere. The queen stands beside him, her arm gently embracing him in a gesture of deep affection, creating an image both regal and intimate, rich in humanistic expression. Other statue groups show Menkaure flanked by goddesses, such as Hathor and local deities, symbols of harmonious relationships between royal and divine power. These masterpieces were carved from black diorite, one of the hardest stones in Egypt, yet the sculptors rendered them with astonishing delicacy. The pharaoh's body is symmetrical, his face serene and refined, and the goddesses exude a graceful air of divine protection. For this reason, Menkaure's statuary is considered the pinnacle of Old Kingdom Egyptian sculpture, where absolute power was portrayed hand in hand with familial devotion and spiritual reverence. Menkaure's final years were marked by personal tragedy. His eldest son, who had been groomed to inherit the throne, died before him, leaving a void in the royal succession. Menkaure himself passed away before his pyramid at Giza was completed. Much of its outer casing remained unfinished. The pyramid, though the smallest among Giza's trio, thus became an incomplete legacy with profound symbolic weight. After Menkaure's death, around 2503 BC, the throne passed to another of his sons, Shepseskaf. Shepseskaf ensured the basic completion of Menkaure's pyramid, but much of the outer cladding remained unfinished, leaving the monument with a rough and exposed appearance today. Uniquely, Shepseskaf chose not to build a pyramid for himself, but instead commissioned a massive mastaba at Saqqara, Mastabat el-Pharaon. This unconventional decision marked the end of the Grand Pyramid tradition at Giza, symbolic close to the golden age of the Fourth Dynasty. During the Fourth Dynasty, as monumental pyramids rose in the sands of Giza, Egyptian society was being shaped not only in stone, but also through human labor and daily life. Society at this time was stratified, like the pyramid itself. At the summit stood the pharaoh, a living god, wielding absolute control over land, people, and religion. Below him was a royal family and nobility, buried in grand mastabas, wealthy and powerful. Officials and scribes formed the administrative backbone, calculating taxes and recording events in hieroglyphs on wooden tablets and papyrus. Priests oversaw temples, granaries, farmland, and rituals, commanding wealth on par with nobility. Craftsmen and artisans, stonemasons, carpenters, jewelers, weavers, potters created statues, ceramics, linen, jewelry, and boats. Farmers made up the majority, living along the Nile, farming the land, raising livestock, and during the flood season, working on pyramid construction. Slaves and war captives did exist, but they were relatively few, primarily laboring in quarries or serving elite households, not the primary workforce behind the pyramids. Ordinary people lived in small mud brick houses with flat roofs, a few simple rooms, and a courtyard for drying agricultural produce. Daily meals were modest: bread made from emmer wheat, beer brewed from barley, supplemented with river fish, waterfowl, garlic, onions, dates, and figs. Beef, lamb, and goose were typically reserved for festivals or distributed to workers on state construction projects. In contrast, nobles enjoyed lavish banquets, with imported wine from Canaan, roasted goose, and honey cakes served on elegant stone tables. Clothing was generally made from linen. Men wore kilts, while women dressed in long, form-fitting gowns. The upper classes favored fine white linen, embroidered with gold thread, whereas commoners wore coarser fabric. Both men and women adorned themselves with jewelry, necklaces, rings, and earrings made from Nubian gold, gemstones, and ivory. They also used cosmetics for both beauty and protection from the sun. Kohl was applied to outline the eyes, red pigment from minerals served as lipstick, and scented oils or resin were used as perfumes. Hair was often shaved or cut short for comfort in the heat, with wigs, made of wool or real hair, worn especially among the nobility. People tended to marry young, and the family formed the foundation of society. While marriage was usually based on mutual agreement, Egyptian women held significantly more rights than in many contemporary civilizations. They could own land, inherit property, sign contracts, and even initiate divorce if dissatisfied. Families were typically large, both to ensure lineage and provide labor for farming and construction. After work, leisure took many forms. Games and sports were an essential part of life. Children played with clay balls, cloth dolls, and spinning tops. Adults enjoyed Senet, one of the world's oldest known board games, which carried both recreational and religious meaning. Popular sports included swimming, rowing, hunting, archery, and wrestling, activities that doubled as military training. Among the elite, hunting hippos and lions served as displays of strength and prestige. The calendar was filled with festivals tied to the agricultural cycle and the gods. People sang, drank beer, and danced under the moonlight, while priests performed ritual sacrifices in temples dedicated to Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Hathor. Music filled the air with harps, flutes, and drums, while dancers performed sacred routines in clouds of incense. These festivals were not just religious ceremonies. They were moments of communal bonding, when people could briefly forget the burdens of labor. The ancient Egyptians possessed remarkable medical knowledge. They used honey for its antibacterial properties, resins as antiseptics, and practiced basic surgery, including treatments for broken bones. Workers at Giza received care in field hospitals, and skeletal remains show clear signs of medical intervention. Yet illness remained a constant threat. Malaria, parasites, and construction accidents were widespread. As a result, the belief that death was not an end, but a journey to the eternal realm permeated all social classes. Even the poor were buried with pottery jars, loaves of bread, and bottles of beer, provisions for the afterlife. The Fourth Dynasty concluded with the brief reign of Shepseskaf. When the throne passed to Userkaf around 2494 BCE, the founding king of the Fifth Dynasty, Egypt no longer channeled all its resources into constructing massive pyramids. Instead, the king and the priesthood elevated the sun god Ra to the central position in religious life, transforming the pharaoh into the son of Ra, a divine intermediary between heaven and earth. Userkaf may have married Queen Kentkawzai, daughter of Menkor and member of the royal house of the Fourth Dynasty. Kentkawzai was buried in a special tomb at Giza with the title Mother of Two Kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. This has led many scholars to believe she was not only a queen, but may have acted as regent, or even ruled briefly as a female pharaoh before power was fully consolidated under Userkaf. Through this political marriage, the Fifth Dynasty inherited the bloodline of Giza, legitimizing the new royal line. If the Fourth Dynasty was synonymous with the grand pyramids of Giza, the Fifth Dynasty began with the rise of the solar cult. Userkaf was the first pharaoh to formally declare himself son of Ra, placing the sun religion at the very heart of royal authority. Rather than concentrate on a monumental pyramid, he commissioned a sun temple at Abusir, a symbolic structure crowned with a stone obelisk reaching skyward like the first rays of dawn. His pyramid at Saqqara was much smaller than those of Giza, almost minimal in scale, yet this very modesty reflected a significant shift. The pharaoh's power was no longer embedded solely in stone, but in the light of the sun god illuminating all of Egypt. Economically, Userkaf strengthened and expanded Egypt's trade with the Near East. Timber from Byblos, copper from Sinai, gold and ivory from Nubia all became lifelines sustaining both the royal court and the sun temples. This laid the foundation for a new era in which the pharaoh ruled not only through stone and labor, but through faith and commerce. The throne then passed to Sahur, Userkaf's son, and under his reign, Egypt truly extended beyond its borders. Sahur became renowned for distant maritime expeditions. For the first time in Egyptian history, stone inscriptions recorded scenes of merchant ships crossing the Mediterranean. His fleet sailed to Byblos, modern-day Lebanon, to procure prize cedar wood for shipbuilding and temple construction, and ventured south to mysterious land of Punt, possibly modern Somalia or Eritrea, bringing back incense, myrrh, animal skins, feathers, and even sacred baboons used in religious rites. His mortuary temple at Abusir contains exquisitely carved reliefs. The earliest stone documentaries showing merchant ships, war galleys, prisoners in procession, farmers delivering taxes, and nobles attending festivals. These carvings offer the clearest early evidence of the emergence of an Egyptian navy, while also reflecting society increasingly complex, rich in trade, yet riddled with conflict. Sahur's pyramid, also at Abu Sir, was far smaller than those at Giza, but distinguished by the sophistication of its relief art. Not only gods and pharaohs, but scenes of daily life, bakers, goose herders, and hunters, were carved into the walls, expressing the belief that the pharaoh ruled not only over the dead, but over the living. Notably, Sahur solidified ties with the Heliopolis priesthood, the cult center of Ra. This indicates that the fifth dynasty was gradually shifting from the absolute power of the pharaoh to a more symbiotic relationship with the priestly class. Though subtle, this change defined the era. The pharaoh was now not just a king, but a divine son of the sun god, ruling by the people's faith in eternal light. After Sahur, the throne passed to his son Neferurker Kakai, circa 2475 to 2455 BC, one of the most notable pharaohs of the early 5th dynasty. Neferurker began constructing the largest pyramid at Abu Sir, but the monument remained unfinished upon his death. Nevertheless, his reign marked another major development. For the first time in history, the system of 5 official royal titulary names was standardized: Horus name, Neti name, Golden Horus, Praenomen, and Nomen. From this point onward, each pharaoh of Egypt was not just a ruler, but a sacred institution, with every name carrying symbolic religious and political weight, affirming their divine status. Neferurker is also known for the records preserved on Palermo stone, a priceless analytic stele that lists detailed events during his reign, from offerings and distribution of temple goods to military campaigns and construction projects. It remains one of the few primary sources offering historians clear insight into the political and religious life of Egypt during this period. At the same time, Neferurker expanded the bureaucratic apparatus. Priests and officials began to gain increasing power, reflecting a gradual transition from the pharaoh's absolute authority to a system that shared power with Egypt's upper classes. Following Neferurker's death, the throne briefly passed to Shepsekhar, circa 2455 BC, likely from a different branch of the royal family. His reign may have lasted only a few months or years. The limited remains of unfinished monuments at Abu Sir suggest his time on the throne was fleeting. This ephemeral rule indicates possible instability or succession disputes within the royal house. He was followed by Neferfra, circa 2455 to 2445 BC, a son of Neferurker who came to the throne young but died prematurely after ruling less than a decade. His pyramid at Abu Sir, known as the Unfinished Pyramid, had only its foundations laid. His mortuary temple was later converted into a sun temple, reaffirming the continued dominance of the Ra cult as the central pillar of royal legitimacy. Despite its brevity, Neferfra's reign highlighted the fragility of kingship in this era, when a pharaoh's early death could leave behind incomplete legacies in both architecture and state affairs. After Neferfra's sudden death, the throne passed to Nusser Aini, 2445 to 2421 BC, either his younger brother or cousin. Nusser emerged as one of the most distinguished pharaohs of the 5th dynasty due to both the length of his reign and his architectural legacy. He completed the unfinished mortuary complexes of his father and brother, ensuring continuity of royal tradition. His greatest achievement was construction of the Sun Temple at Abu Ghurab, an imposing structure featuring a massive obelisk described as a stone ray of light piercing the sky. The temple's reliefs depict scenes of harvest, cattle herding, and joyful festivals, illustrating the rich tapestry of Egyptian daily life and the bond between Ra and the prosperity of the people. Under Nusser, Egyptian art achieved new levels of refinement. Carvings of people and rituals shed their rigid forms and came to life, as if each scene were a stone film reel. The throne then passed to Menkaure, 2421 to 2414 BCE. Though his reign was short and left little mark in historical records, sources suggest he too may have constructed a sun temple, though its location remains uncertain. His most visible legacy is a modest pyramid at Saqqara, often referred to as Mastabat el Pharaon II. Though not as monumental as the works of his predecessors, it proves that pyramid construction continued alongside the flourishing of solar temples. After Menkaure came Djedkare-Isisi, 2414 to 2375 BCE, one of the longest reigning pharaohs of the 5th dynasty. He is remembered not for vast religious monuments, but for administrative reforms. Under his rule, the role of the vizier, chief minister, was elevated, and the power of officials and priests became more pronounced. This marked a critical transition. The pharaoh no longer held all power alone, but began sharing influence with a wealthy and entrenched elite. Economically, Djedkare's reign was prosperous. Egypt exploited copper and turquoise mines in Sinai, traded with Punt and Byblos, and extended influence into Nubia. Tombs of officials, especially viziers, began to include elaborate inscriptions detailing their titles, wealth, and rituals, indicating an increasingly complex state with broad administrative class. Djedkare was succeeded by his son, Unas, 2375 to 2345 BCE, the final pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. Although his pyramid at Saqqara was modest compared to the grandeur of Giza or Abusir, it became a milestone in Egyptian religious history. For the first time, the interior walls were inscribed with a pyramid text, a collection of spells, prayers, and rituals meant to guide the pharaoh's soul into the afterlife. These texts represent the oldest surviving religious literature known to humanity, laying the foundation for the later coffin texts and Book of the Dead. In addition to religious inscriptions, the reliefs in Una's mortuary temple vividly portray scenes from everyday life. Bakers kneading dough, hunters herding livestock, and tax collectors receiving tribute. These images served not merely as decoration, but as a message that the pharaoh was a guardian of Ma'at, the cosmic order, ensuring not only spiritual transition, but the material prosperity of Egypt. However, Una's reign also revealed a deeper truth. The pharaoh's power was no longer absolute. As the sun temples in Heliopolis grew in wealth and influence, and regional nobles, nomarchs, gained increasing autonomy and resources, centralized royal authority began to erode. This growing decentralization set the stage for the political turmoil of the 6th dynasty and the first intermediate period that followed. After the death of Unas, the throne passed to Teti, 2345 to 2333 BCE, the founder of the 6th dynasty. He strengthened his legitimacy by marrying Ipet-I, daughter of Unas, but simultaneously began delegating significant power to officials and priests, especially the nomarchs and the clergy of Heliopolis, causing royal authority to gradually fragment. Teti's pyramid at Saqqara was small and contained pyramid texts inside, continuing the tradition started by Unas. Teti's reign ended abruptly and tragically. Ancient records suggest that he may have been assassinated by his own courtiers, a reflection of court instability and internal palace conflicts. In the brief void that followed, a shadowy figure emerged, Userkare, 2333 to 2332 BCE. Many scholars believe he may have been a usurper, taking advantage of Teti's sudden death to seize power for a very short time, perhaps only a few months or years. The throne then passed to Pepi-I, 2332 to 2283 BCE. Son of Teti and Ipet-I, he became one of the most powerful pharaohs of the 6th dynasty, reigning for nearly 50 years. Under Pepi-I, Egypt's bureaucratic system expanded dramatically. He promoted numerous nomarchs in distant provinces to better manage tax collection and manpower. However, this policy inadvertently empowered local nobility, planting the seeds for future political division. Pepi-I is also remembered for his military and trade expeditions. He sent troops and trade delegations to Nubia to acquire gold and ivory, to Punt for incense and myrrh, to Sinai to extract copper and turquoise, and to Byblos, modern Lebanon, to obtain valuable cedar wood. Reliefs in his mortuary temple at Saqqara depict merchant ships, hunters, and tribute bearers, serving as both art and visual records of Egypt's economy and foreign relations during his reign. Religiously, during Pepi-I's time, sun temples were no longer built with the frequency seen in earlier reigns. Instead, pyramids continued to be constructed, with pyramid texts becoming more elaborate, evidence of maturing royal funerary tradition. Artistic reliefs reached new levels of finesse, portraying not only deities, but also everyday scenes of farmers, artisans, soldiers, and court rituals. After Pepi I, the throne passed to his son Merenra I, 2283 to 2278 BC. Though he ruled for only about 5 years, Merenra was remembered as a dynamic ruler. He continued campaigns into Nubia, securing trade routes for gold and ivory, and even opened new trade routes across the western desert, linking Egypt with oases and distant regions. However, the defining feature of his reign was his reliance on local officials. Merenra granted extensive authority to nomarchs, empowering them to collect taxes and administer provinces. This made the central government increasingly dependent on provincial nobility, a trend that would have dire consequences in the following decades. His pyramid at Saqqara was modest in size, and while it contained pyramid texts, it lacked the grandeur of earlier monuments, signaling a decline in the state's resources and prestige. Following Merenra, the throne passed to Pepi II, 2278 to 2184 BC, a pharaoh known not just in Egyptian history, but in all of human history, as he is believed to have ruled for 94 years, the longest reign of any monarch. He ascended the throne at around 6 years old, under the regency of his mother. During the early years, Egypt remained stable. Expeditions continued to Nubia, Punt, and Libya, with returning ships laden with incense, wood, gold, animal skins, and other luxury goods. The military remained a strong force at the borders, but the pharaoh's reign, too long, became a double-edged sword. As Pepi II aged, royal power weakened dramatically. The nomarchs, once appointed by his father, had by now become immensely wealthy and powerful, controlling vast lands, resources, and even private armies. The bureaucratic machine grew bloated, corrupt, and ineffective at managing the entire nation. Farmers were burdened with heavy taxation and forced labor, while the royal palace grew increasingly extravagant. Legends describe Pepi II as a frail old king, detached from reality, indulging in eccentric amusements, an image of a court decaying in luxury, disconnected from the people. By the time Pepi II died, after nearly a century of rule, Egypt was nearly exhausted. Some Greek sources, especially Herodotus and Manetho, claim that the throne passed to a female pharaoh named Nitocris. She was portrayed as a queen of vengeance, building a banquet hall and then drowning those who had murdered her brother in a river of blood. However, modern scholars believe that Nitocris may have been a legend or confusion with another king's name. Whether real or myth, the story of Nitocris reflects a deeper truth. The Sixth Dynasty ended in chaos and folklore, no longer marked by the glory of great pyramids, but by the long shadow of a dynasty too protracted, too feeble, leading Egypt into the First Intermediate Period, a time of fragmentation and crisis. When Pepi II, the pharaoh who ruled for nearly a century, died, Egypt was left without a strong successor capable of maintaining a centralized state. After more than 90 years under a weak and aging ruler, the royal court had decayed, power had fragmented, and his death around 2181 BC created a massive power vacuum. This marked the beginning of the First Intermediate Period, the first dark age in Egypt's history. In this context, the nomarchs, provincial governors originally promoted during the reigns of Pepi I and Pepi II, had now become little kings in their own territories. They ruled over land, collected taxes, and even maintained their own armies. Memphis, the former capital, fell into decline, while powerful local families in Upper and Lower Egypt began to rise. Society was in crisis not only politically, but also environmentally. Prolonged droughts, the Nile failed to flood regularly, fields dried up, and peasants starved. Ancient texts describe scenes where the poor became rich and the rich were ruined. A world turned upside down, where Ma'at, the divine order and foundation of the Egyptian worldview, was shaken. Politically, the country was divided in two. In the north, the kings of the 9th and 10th dynasties, based in Heracleopolis Magna, claimed the title of pharaoh, but their power was limited and they controlled mostly Lower Egypt. In the south, a family based in Thebes gradually rose in strength. found in the early 11th dynasty, proclaiming their own kingship and slowly expanding their influence along the Nile Valley. From this point onward, Egypt entered a period of dual kingship, with two rival dynasties existing simultaneously, competing through diplomacy and military campaigns. Religion also underwent profound changes. As the pharaoh's power was no longer absolute, beliefs about the afterlife began to shift. Previously, immortality had been a near-exclusive privilege of the king, but now, commoners began to believe that they too could attain eternal life. This is evidenced by the emergence of the coffin text, a body of funerary spells and rituals extending beyond the royal family to include nobles and the wealthy. Significantly, the god Osiris, symbol of death and rebirth, gradually replaced Ra as the central figure of worship. For over a century, Egypt persisted in a state of fragmentation, with Heracleopolis controlling the north and Thebes rising as a southern power. The climax of this conflict came around 2055 BC, when Pharaoh Mentuhotep II of Thebes launched a military campaign, defeated Heracleopolis, and reunified Egypt. This event ended the first intermediate period and ushered in the Middle Kingdom, an era of revival and renewed stability. After more than a century of fragmentation, Egypt was once again reunified under the reign of Mentuhotep II, 2055 to 2004 BC. This king, who hailed from Thebes, defeated his northern rival from Heracleopolis, ending the era of dual dynasties and ushering in a new age, the Middle Kingdom, to his people. He was the pharaoh who restored Ma'at, the cosmic order, bringing light after a long night of chaos. Mentuhotep II was not only a warrior, but also a pioneer of new funerary styles. His tomb at Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of Thebes, combined mortuary temple and tomb, a precursor to grand funerary complexes later built in the Valley of the Kings. For this, posterity remembers him as the Pharaoh of Unification. He was succeeded by his son Mentuhotep III, 2004 to 1992 BC. While his father rebuilt Egypt with the sword, Mentuhotep III expanded its influence through trade and diplomacy. He launched expeditions to Punt, bringing back incense, exotic woods, and animal skins, and re-established relations with Byblos and Nubia. During his reign, Thebes flourished as a religious center, where temples began to rise in honor of Ammonius, the deity who would become the central figure of Egyptian religion for centuries to come. Then came the reign of Mentuhotep IV, 1992 to 1985 BC, a king whose name faded into the shadows of history. Very few records about him remain, and it is likely that true power had already shifted to his vizier, Amenemhat, a powerful figure in the royal court. Upon Mentuhotep IV's death, the royal line of Thebes ended, giving way to a new dynasty founded by Amenemhat. This political shift not only launched Dynasty 12, but also ushered in the golden age of the Middle Kingdom. The end of Dynasty 11 paved the way for a new figure, Amenemhat I, 1985 to 1955 BCE. Originally a vizier and of non-royal blood, Amenemhat seized power and founded Dynasty 12, beginning the Middle Kingdom's golden age. To better control the nation, he moved the capital from Thebes to Ichtoi, near the Fayum region, a strategic location between Upper and Lower Egypt. From here, Memphis was within reach, and Upper Egypt remained close enough to govern, turning Ichtoi into the new political nerve center of Egypt. 330, a key difference under Amenemhat I was his effort to curb the power of the nomarchs, local governors who had once acted as petty kings and contributed to the fall of Dynasty 6. He gradually stripped them of power, replacing them with loyal officials and forming a centralized bureaucratic system. At the same time, Amenemhat I launched major infrastructure projects, especially in the Fayum, digging canals, reclaiming desert land, and turning it into fertile farmland. This was not just an economic endeavor, but also symbolic. If a pharaoh could control the Nile's flow, he could also control Ma'at, the universal order. The throne then passed his son, Senusret I, 1955 to 1911 BC. Notably, Senusret I co-ruled with his father for a time, a rare case of co-regency intended to prevent succession crises. This demonstrated the dynasty's pragmatic political thinking. Once in full control, Senusret I became one of the most militarily active rulers, launching multiple campaigns into Nubia, constructing a chain of fortresses along the Nile to control the gold mines and trade routes, and effectively turning Nubia into a vassal region. Not only a warrior, Senusret I was also the initiator of the rise of the god Ammonius in Karnak. He ordered the construction of the first major structures at the Karnak Temple in Thebes, foundations for a monumental complex that would reach its peak during the New Kingdom. The choice to elevate Ammonius, the Theban god of wind and sky, over Ra, the sun god of Heliopolis, also reflect a significant religious shift tied to the emerging center of power. Following the strong foundations laid by Amenemhat I and Senusret I, the Middle Kingdom entered a more stable phase under Amenemhat II, 1911 to 1877 BCE. While his predecessors focused on unification and military conquest, Amenemhat II pursued a path of diplomacy and trade. During his reign, Egypt expanded its commercial networks in all directions. Cedar wood from Byblos, incense from Punt, and precious stones from the Aegean. Inscriptions on stele record Egyptian fleets docking at distant ports, returning with luxury items such as silver, turquoise, and seashells, goods rarely seen in the Nile Valley. His court was marked not by war, but by prosperity and strong international connections, presenting an image of an Egypt thriving through peaceful exchange. His successor, Senusret II, 1877 to 1870 BCE, continued this path, but with greater focus on domestic development. This pharaoh is not remembered for grand battles, but for one colossal project, the reclamation of the Fayum oasis. He commissioned canals, managed the Nile's water flow, and transformed lowlands into fertile farmland, significantly expanding Egypt's agricultural base. Unlike his predecessors who clashed with nomarchs, Senusret II adopted a softer approach. Rather than stripping local lord to power, he sought cooperation, especially in agricultural projects. The result was a flourishing rural economy, greater food stability, and a period of national abundance born from a turn toward the fields. But this balance would soon shift under Senusret III, 1870 to 1831 BCE, one of the most powerful pharaohs in all of Egyptian history. He embodied the warrior king, the reformer, and later a deified protector. In stark contrast to his father's moderate rule, Senusret III launched a series of military campaigns into Nubia, rich in gold and ivory. To control the region, he built an extensive chain of fortresses along the Nile, from Semna to Buin, marking the first time Egypt maintained a long-term militarized southern border. Domestically, Senusret III was relentless in curbing the power of nomarchs, centralizing authority directly under the pharaoh. Local aristocrats were sidelined and replaced by royal appointees, establishing a firmly centralized state once again. His image left a striking impression in the world of art. Statues of Senusret III do not portray him as a youthful, divine figure, but rather with a weary face, sunken eyes, and tight lips. This was not a symbol of weakness, but a powerful message. The pharaoh was the one who bore the burdens of the entire nation, a man who suffered on behalf of his people. This artistic departure made him a more human and powerful symbol, so much so that he was later worshipped as a protective deity. The pinnacle of the Middle Kingdom is often associated with the name Amenemhat III, 1831 to 1786 BC, a ruler remembered by posterity as the great economic pharaoh of Egypt. He poured his efforts into massive hydraulic projects, especially in the Fayum region, where he ordered canals to be dug and lake beds cleared, turning Lake Moeris into a vast reservoir for regulating the Nile's floods. This swampy region was transformed into fertile farmlands, feeding tens of thousands of farmers. The project was more than a feat of engineering. It was a symbolic act. The pharaoh, by mastering the waters, also preserved the balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order. Under Amenemhat III, the Egyptian people experienced unprecedented agricultural prosperity. With the regulation of Lake Moeris and Fayum, along with an advanced network of canals, dikes, and water locks, Nile levels were effectively controlled. Farmers were no longer wholly dependent on the unpredictable flood cycle. Instead, they could now plant multiple crops throughout the year, rather than relying solely on a single post-flood harvest. This expanded cultivation area and caused crop yields to skyrocket. Egyptian farmers primarily cultivated emmer wheat and barley, the foundation for bread and beer, the two staple foods of Egyptian society. Thanks to the fertile soils of the Fayum, they also grew beans, sesame, vegetables, grapes, and figs, turning the region into a diverse and abundant breadbasket. Animal husbandry also flourished, with the raising of cattle, sheep, and goats providing meat, milk, hides, and wool. Notably, the reign of Amenemhat III witnessed major inventions and advancements: large-scale irrigation engineering, water channels, sluice gates, and reservoirs were constructed, forming one of the earliest state-planned hydraulic systems in history. Improved agricultural tools. Wooden plows with copper blades and copper sickles replaced older flint tools, increasing productivity. One particularly ingenious invention was the shaduf, a long wooden pole mounted on a pivot, with a leather bucket or clay jar on one end and a counterweight of stone or clay on the other. With minimal effort, a farmer could pull down the bucket to draw water from a canal or the Nile, and the counterweight would lift it, allowing easy pouring into irrigation channels. Compared to manual scooping, the shaduf drastically increased irrigation speed and, more importantly, enabled water to be lifted above canal level, expanding farmland into previously dry regions. Standardization of measurements. The state regulated agricultural taxation using official measuring tools and centralized granaries. Evidence shows that land surveys were conducted regularly after each annual Nile flood. Improved mud brick quality. More durable bricks were used for canal linings, levees, and flood-resistant storage structures. With these transformations, Egyptians under Amenemhat III not only had food security but agricultural surpluses, positioning Egypt as a granary nation in the ancient world. Many scholars consider this period the most advanced phase of agriculture during the Middle Kingdom. Beyond agriculture, Amenemhat III expanded trade farther than ever before. Records mention Egyptian merchant ships docking in Byblos, Punt, and even on the island of Crete, returning with copper, timber, ivory, perfumes, and precious stones. This prosperity was mirrored in the scale of his constructions. He commissioned two pyramids at Dashur, the Black Pyramid and the White Pyramid. Though their engineering does not match the perfection of Giza, these monuments represent the ambition and administrative power of his reign. After his death, the throne passed to Amenemhat IV, 1786 to 1777 BC. Though his reign was short, he maintained the policies of his father. A few expeditions to Punt and Sinai are documented under his rule, though no monumental achievements have survived to define his legacy. He stands as a quiet bridge of continuity, ensuring that the kingdom did not fall into immediate decline after a golden age. In a surprising final transition, the throne passed to a woman, Sobonferu, 1777 to 1773 BC. She is the first female pharaoh in Egyptian history, confirmed by the historical record, an event that highlights a distinct phase in the royal court's evolution. Her brief reign left a mark through her devotion to the crocodile god Sobek, protector of the Fayum, the very land her father had transformed into Egypt's agricultural heartland. She may be seen as the one who closed the circle of the 12th dynasty. It began with reclamation of the land and ended with a queen devoted to the god of that fertile region. After the death of Sobonferu, the female pharaoh who brought the 12th dynasty to a close, Egypt entered a new era of instability known as the 13th dynasty, 1795 to 1650 BC. If the 12th dynasty represented the pinnacle of the Middle Kingdom, then the 13th was its twilight, a slow descent into decline. Pharaohs came and went in rapid succession, many reigning for only a few years or even months. The Turin King list records dozens of royal names, yet most remain obscure, having left behind no significant monuments, military campaigns, or political achievements. This constant turnover severely weakened central authority. The nomarchs and provincial leaders, once tightly controlled under Senusret III, began to reassert themselves as regional lords, ruling their territories with near-complete autonomy. The royal court in the capital became a shadow of its former self, holding the title of pharaoh but lacking any real power. Despite the political disintegration, Egypt's agricultural economy managed to endure. Thanks to the irrigation systems and canal networks developed during the reign of Amenemhat III, the Nile's fertile floodplain continued to yield abundant harvests, sustaining the population. International trade still existed, though it was no longer as vibrant as during the golden years. Trade voyages to Byblos, Punt, or Crete became increasingly rare, as the weakened central government could no longer sponsor or organize large-scale maritime expeditions. The most noteworthy development of this era was not political, but religious and cultural. Previously, funerary rites and belief in the afterlife had been privileges reserved for pharaohs and the elite. But during the 13th dynasty, this belief became democratized. The coffin text, a collection of spells, prayers, and rituals guiding the soul through the afterlife, became widespread. These inscriptions no longer appeared solely in royal pyramids, but now also adorned the coffins of the wealthier commoners. The afterlife was no longer the exclusive domain of royalty, but had become a shared aspiration of all Egyptians. Yet, while religious thought expanded, reality grew darker. The fragmented state left Egypt increasingly vulnerable. By the mid-17th century BCE, nomadic groups and warriors from Asia, later known as the Hyksos, began infiltrating the delta, initially arriving as traders. They gradually took control, establishing a stronghold in Avaris, in Egypt's northern delta. With their dominance over Lower Egypt, the 13th dynasty officially collapsed, marking the end of the Middle Kingdom and the beginning of a new period of turmoil, the Second Intermediate Period. The Second Intermediate Period did not arrive overnight. It was a result of Egypt's long process of internal weakening. After the end of the 12th dynasty, the pharaohs of the 13th dynasty moved the capital south to Thebes, leaving the Delta region, Egypt's most prosperous center of agriculture and trade. Poorly defended, that vacuum of power attracted waves of Canaanite migrants from the Levant. As early as the reign of Amenemhat I in the 12th dynasty, a small trade post named Hutware had been established in the far eastern delta. But as central authority waned, this post became a haven for thousands of foreigners. From it grew the city of Avaris, a bustling urban center with tombs containing donkey burials and Canaanite pottery with triangular motifs, clear markers of Levantine culture. The Egyptians refer to them as the Amu, or Asiatics. The term Hyksos is derived from the phrase Hikakasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. Initially, they arrived as traders and semi-nomadic herders, but they brought technologies previously unknown to Egypt. Horses, two-wheeled chariots, composite bows, and bronze armor and weaponry. As Egypt descended further into chaos with a series of short-lived pharaohs, these foreigners in Avaris gradually rose to military power. Around 1650 BC, their leader Seleucus captured Memphis and founded the 15th dynasty of the Hyksos, establishing his capital at Avaris. What was remarkable was that they did not reject Egyptian culture. The Hyksos wore the royal crown, used hieroglyphic script, and built temples, yet they also maintained their own identity. They worshipped the god Seth, whom they equated with a storm deity from their homeland, and elevated him to equal status with Ra. This fusion of cultures allowed them both to legitimize their rule and preserve their foreign heritage. After Seleucus laid the foundation for Hyksos rule in Avaris, their dynasty reached its zenith under kings Kion and Apophis. Around 1620 BCE, Kion ruled. His influence extended far beyond Egypt's borders. Seal impressions bearing his name have been found as far afield as Mesopotamia, beyond the Levant. This shows that under the Hyksos, Egypt became deeply enmeshed in a Near Eastern trade network, unprecedented in scope. From Avaris, caravans and fleets moved goods across the region. Nubian ivory, Lebanese cedar, Anatolian tin, aromatic oils, and precious stones all flowed through their hands. Egypt, once largely inward-looking and confined along the Nile, had now become a key link in an international trade system. Alongside this economic boom came a decisive military advantage. The Hyksos introduced horses and chariots, mobile and agile weapons Egypt had never seen. They wielded composite bows, crafted from layers of wood, sinew, and horn, with far greater power and range than traditional Egyptian bows. Thanks to this, a smaller Hyksos army could easily defeat larger native forces. These military innovations would leave a lasting impact. After the Hyksos were eventually expelled, the Egyptians would adopt and transform these tools into instruments of empire. But their influence extended beyond war and trade, touching daily life and culture. The Hyksos brought Levantine customs, black and white Canaanite pottery, donkey burials beside warriors' tombs, and foreign-influenced domestic architecture. All of this blended with native traditions, turning the Delta into a cultural crossroads between Egypt and the Near East. The true peak came during the reign of Apophis, a Pepi, 1580 to 1550 BCE. He transformed Avars from a fortified trading post into a great port city, complete with granaries, docks, and temples. Apophis was also a skilled diplomat. He forged alliances with Nubia to the south, forming a pincer movement that hemmed in Thebes, the last bastion of native Egyptian authority. What made Apophis stand out most was his religious strategy. He chose Seth, god of storms, chaos, and power, as the patron deity of his reign. To Apophis, Seth was the embodiment of Hyksos strength, and he boldly elevated Seth to the same status as Ra, Egypt's traditional solar deity. This daring synthesis served a dual purpose. It asserted foreign identity while cleverly using Egyptian theology to justify Hyksos' kingship. In the eyes of the Hyksos, Seth was divine proof that they had the right to rule the land of Egypt. While Apophis transformed Avaris into a powerful capital in the north, Thebes in the south remained the last stronghold of native Egyptian resistance. From the 17th century BCE, the line of 17 dynasty kings in Thebes maintained an independent rule, small in scale but deeply rooted in Egyptian tradition. In reality, at the start of Apophis' reign, Thebes was significantly weaker. For decades, it accepted the payment of tribute to the Hyksos in order to survive, yet the flame of resistance never truly extinguished. Around 1575 BCE, Theban king Senectenra Ahmose began to reject submission altogether. He openly defied Apophis' authority, asserting that Thebes, not Avaris, was a legitimate center of Egypt. From that point, the 17th dynasty in Thebes became a symbol of unity, militarily fragile but growing stronger in resolve. When Seqenenre II ascended the throne, 1560 to 1558 BC, conflict erupted into open war. One famous tale recounts how Apophis sent a provocative message, complaining that the hippos in Thebes' sacred lake were keeping him awake all the way in Avaris, a thinly veiled insult designed to humiliate and force southern submission. Seqenenre refused to be dishonored. He took up arms and led his troops into direct confrontation. The battle was so fierce that his mummy still bears brutal wounds to this day, gashes to the skull from axes, spears, and maces, proof that he died on the battlefield, a martyr king who gave his life resisting Hyksos rule. His son Kamose, 1558 to 1555 BCE, succeeded him and vowed to carry the struggle forward. Kamose was not just a general. He turned war into a political doctrine. On stele carved at Karnak, he wrote fiery proclamations denouncing the shame of letting foreigners rule the north. Kamose led daring campaigns deep into Lower Egypt, striking directly at Hyksos strongholds near Avaris. He also worked to cut off the Hyksos-Nubian alliance, a pincer movement that had long pressured Thebes from both north and south. Though Kamose died young, his bold offenses paved the way for his successor's final victory. That successor was Ahmose I, 1550 to 1525 BCE, brother of Kamose and son of Seqenenre II. Ascending the throne at a young age, Ahmose inherited the mission of national liberation. Around 1550 BCE, he launched a decisive campaign, the siege of Avaris, the Hyksos capital. The battle was long and grueling, but ultimately Apophis was defeated and Avaris fell. The Hyksos fled to Sharuan in southern Palestine, but Ahmose pursued them relentlessly. He besieged the fortress for 3 years, eventually destroying it and ending Hyksos' power in Egypt once and for all. With that victory, Ahmose I reunified the country after nearly 2 centuries of division, founding the 18th dynasty and ushering in the New Kingdom, the most glorious era in ancient Egyptian history. after defeating the Hyksos. Ahmose I did not stop there. He expanded Egypt's influence southward into Nubia to control the gold mines, and northward into Palestine to prevent future invasions. As a result, Egypt ceased to be merely a riverine kingdom along the Nile and began to take shape as a regional empire. Internally, Ahmose began to rebuild the nation, restoring temples destroyed during the war, reorganizing the administrative system, and restarting an economy that had long been stagnant. After Ahmose, the throne passed to his son, Amenhotep I, 1525 to 1504 BCE. If Ahmose is remembered as a warrior king, Amenhotep is seen as an organizer and builder. He no longer faced powerful external invaders, and thus focused on securing Egypt's borders, particularly along Nubia and the Near East. During his reign, the army was maintained in strength but saw fewer campaigns. Instead, Egypt began to develop a stable governance model for peacetime. Amenhotep I's most groundbreaking achievement was in the realm of royal burial practices. Rather than continuing the pyramid tradition, which had become prone to tomb robbery, he established a new royal necropolis, the Valley of the Kings in western Thebes. From this point forward, pharaohs would no longer be buried in towering pyramids, but in hidden rock-cut tombs within the mountains. This was a strategic shift, one that ensured security, while also creating a new political-religious center closely tied to the cult of Ammonius in Thebes. Upon Amenhotep I's death without a direct heir, the throne passed to a skilled general, likely connected to the royal family by marriage, Thutmose 1504 to 1492 BCE. From the outset of his reign, Thutmose I made Egypt's military power clear. In the south, he launched a major campaign into Nubia, personally slaying the Nubian king, and display his body on the prow of the lead ship as a warning to others. Thutmose not only defeated the Nubians, but pushed deep into their territory, constructing fortified outposts along the Nile to ensure lasting control. The annexation of Nubia brought with it vast quantities of gold, greatly enriching the royal treasury. He did not stop there. Thutmose pushed northward, and now equipped with horses and chariots. Technologies learned from the Hyksos. Egyptian forces crossed Sinai, reaching as far as the Euphrates River in Syria. There, he erected a commemorative stela, marking the first time Egyptian influence had extended so far beyond the Nile Valley. This was a pivotal moment, laying the foundation for Egypt to become a transcontinental empire, stretching from Nubia to the Near East. What made Thutmose I remarkable was that he was not only a warrior. He understood that an empire could not be built on the sword alone. It needed a spiritual center. Thus, he became one of the first pharaohs to expand the temple complex at Karnak, erecting pylons and temples to Ammonius, the god who was fast becoming a national deity. This fusion of military glory and divine authority reinforced the image of the pharaoh not just as ruler of Egypt, but as lord of the four corners of the earth. Notably, under Thutmose I, the tradition of royal burials in the Valley of the Kings was firmly established. His tomb is considered one of the first monumental constructions in the valley, inaugurating a practice that would last for centuries. Thutmose II, 1492 to 1479 BCE, succeeded him, but very little is known about his reign. He was quickly overshadowed by his powerful half-sister Hatshepsut, who ruled circa 1479 to 1458 BCE, became one of the most effective and powerful rulers of the new kingdom. Thutmose II had one child with her, and another son with a secondary wife, Thutmose III, whom he designated as a successor. Thutmose III would later reign from 1479 to 1425 BCE. When Thutmose II died, Thutmose III was still too young to rule independently. As a result, his principal wife, Queen Hatshepsut, stepped into the political spotlight as regent. Initially, she acted in the name of protecting the young king's throne, but gradually, she donned a royal crown herself, proclaimed herself pharaoh, and even wore male attire to solidify her image. Her nearly 20-year reign was marked by peace and prosperity. Hatshepsut prioritized trade and construction over military conquest. Her most significant achievement was a trade expedition to Punt, a legendary land near the Red Sea, possibly modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. Her fleet returned with gold, ivory, myrrh, incense, exotic animals, and most notably, live myrrh trees planted in temple courtyards, living proof of Egypt's wealth and far-sighted diplomacy. In architecture, Hatshepsut left behind an immortal masterpiece, her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, carved into the cliffs of Thebes. 3 grand terraces of colonnades rose in succession, with staircases leading upward, flanked by Sphinx statues and reliefs depicting her welcoming tribute from Punt. This was not merely a temple. It was a political statement, affirming her power and status equal to any male pharaoh. Hatshepsut was also a shrewd administrator. She maintained peace domestically and abroad, skillfully allied herself with the powerful priesthood of Ammonius at Karnak, thereby reinforcing her religious legitimacy. She commissioned multiple constructions at Karnak, including colossal red granite obelisks from Aswan, one of which still stands tall today. Uniquely, Hatshepsut's image and statuary often conveyed a rare humanism in Egyptian royal art. Her statues frequently portrayed her with a calm, serene expression rather than the rigid sternness of warrior pharaohs. This made her a singular model of rulership, a female pharaoh who governed not by sword, but by wisdom, commerce, and cultural patronage. When Hatshepsut died, the throne returned to Thutmose III, 1479 to 1425 BCE, a king whom later generations would call the Napoleon of Egypt. For nearly 2 decades, he had lived in the shadow of the powerful female pharaoh, but once he assumed full control, he transformed Egypt from a prosperous kingdom into a true empire, stretching from Nubia in the south to Euphrates River in the north. His first great triumph came at the Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BCE. Over 300 Canaanite city-states, united under the king of Kadesh, sought to block Egypt's advance. But Thutmose III chose the dangerous Aruna Pass, a narrow route no one dared to take. The element of surprise threw the Canaanites into disarray. They fled into the city of Megiddo, which was then besieged for 7 months before surrendering. This victory not only opened Canaan to Egyptian domination, but was also the first battle in history to be recorded in detail, with inscriptions still visible today on the walls of Karnak Temple. After Megiddo, Thutmose III pressed further. He advanced deep into Syria-Palestine, crushing vassal coalitions, and even crossed the desert to reach the Euphrates River, where he erected a stela in Mitanni territory. Simultaneously in the south, he conquered Nubia, establishing fortified garrisons to guard the region's gold mines, key to enriching Egypt's treasury. From this point on, Egypt possessed a vast vassal network, bringing tribute and hostages to the pharaoh. This expansion brought Egypt immense wealth: gold from Nubia, ivory and animal hides from Africa, copper and turquoise from Sinai, cedarwood from Byblos, as well as horses, chariots, and luxury goods from Syria. Trade with Punt and the island of Crete also flourished, turning Egypt into a hub of transcontinental commerce. While his campaigns continued, Thutmose III also sought to divinely immortalize his victories. At Karnak, he expanded the temple complex of Ammonius Ra and constructed the Akhmenu Festival Hall, a building that served both religious and historical purposes. Its reliefs glorify the pharaoh but also meticulously record military campaigns, spoils of war, and tribute processions, making a unique stone chronicle of ancient Egypt. Thutmose III's legacy was the transformation of Egypt into preeminent power of the ancient Near East. No pharaoh before him had extended Egypt's reach so far or sustained it so effectively. To later generations, Thutmose III was both warrior and strategist, and the one who defined Egypt's imperial model. From Hatshepsut's shadow, he rose to greatness, one of the most legendary pharaohs in history. Upon his death, his son Amenhotep II, 1425 to 1401 BCE, ascended the throne. If his father had been a master of expansion, Amenhotep II focused on consolidating what had been gained. He faced early rebellions among vassals in Syria-Canaan. Military campaigns were launched, and stele at Karnak depict him personally executing dozens of rebel leaders, both to intimidate vassals and to assert his dominance. During his reign, Egypt retained control of the Near East, but only through constant military pressure to maintain its vast empire. His successor, Thutmose IV, 1401 to 1391 BCE, was not known for major wars, but rather for how he legitimized his claim to the throne, according to legend, as a young prince. Thutmose went hunting near Giza and slept beneath the Great Sphinx. In a dream, the Sphinx promised him the Egyptian throne if he would clear away the sand burying its body. After becoming pharaoh, Thutmose IV erected the dream stele between the Sphinx's paws, inscribing this tale, a divine endorsement of his kingship. This served not only as a political instrument, perhaps because the succession was not straightforward, but also marked a religious milestone. The Sphinx became a sacred protector of royal authority. After the relatively brief reign of Thutmose IV, the throne passed to his son, Amenhotep III, 1390 to 1352 BC. The reign of Amenhotep III marked the peak of prosperity and peace during the New Kingdom. Unlike his militaristic predecessors, Amenhotep III relied heavily on diplomacy and political marriages. He wed princesses from the kingdoms of Mitanni, Babylon, and even the Hittites, turning the Egyptian royal family into the centerpiece of an international alliance system. The Amarna letters document a vast diplomatic network, featuring lavish exchanges of gold, precious stones, horses, chariots, and foreign princesses. Domestically, he focused on architecture and the arts. Amenhotep III commissioned the magnificent Luxor Temple along the Nile, expanded the temple complex at Karnak, and left behind the colossi of Memnon, two colossal 18-meter statues that once guarded the entrance to his grand mortuary temple. Art during his reign reached unprecedented levels of refinement and splendor, reflecting Egypt's wealth and stability. Religion continued to revolve around the god Ammonius at Karnak, which became the largest pilgrimage and worship center in Egypt. Following Amenhotep III's glorious reign, the throne passed to his son, Amenhotep IV, 1352 to 1336 BCE, better known to history as Akhenaten. Few pharaohs have been as controversial as he, for Akhenaten undertook an unprecedented religious revolution in Egyptian history. From the beginning of his reign, Amenhotep IV showed clear favor toward Aten, the solar disk god whose rays were depicted with outstretched hands. Instead of maintaining Ammonia's traditional central role, he gradually elevated Aten to supreme status. At the height of this reform, he changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning servant of Aten, and declared exclusive worship of Aten, while actively suppressing other deities, particularly Ammonius and the powerful priesthood of Karnak. This was among the earliest attempts at monotheism in recorded history. To distance himself from the influence of the Ammonius cult in Thebes, Akhenaten relocated the capital to a completely new site along the Nile, naming it Akhetaten, Horizon of Aten, now known as Amarna. The city was constructed rapidly, featuring enormous temples to Aten, royal palaces, administrative buildings, and residential areas, all aligned along the sun's path, symbolizing devotion to the one true God. Alongside his religious revolution, Amarna art flourished. In stark contrast to earlier rigid, idealized forms, Akhenaten's era ushered in a style that was more naturalistic and intimate. Reliefs and sculptures depicted the pharaoh with Queen Nefertiti and their daughters in everyday scenes, eating, playing, embracing. Imagery unprecedented in Egyptian tradition. Even Akhenaten's statues displayed unusual features: elongated face, protruding belly, wide hips, challenging the traditional divine aesthetics. Scholars still debate whether these forms were symbolic religious representations, or whether the king suffered from a genetic disorder. However, Akhenaten's reforms did not bring stability. By neglecting military and diplomatic affairs and focusing almost exclusively on religion, he allowed Egypt's influence in Canaan and Syria to erode. The Amarna letters record desperate pleas from vassal kings for help against the Hittites and other invaders, but the court of Akhenaten barely responded. After Akhenaten's death, Egypt entered a period of disarray. The city of Akhetaten was abandoned, the court fragmented, and Egypt's vassal territories in Levant gradually broke free from its control. Amidst this turmoil, a young boy, perhaps only 8 or 9 years old, ascended the throne, Tutankhaten, meaning living image of Aten. But shortly after, under the guidance of royal officials and priests, he changed his name to Tutankhamen, living image of Ammonius. This renaming was not just personal. It marked a clear reversal of Akhenaten's religious policies and a restoration of the Ammonius cult. During his brief reign, 1332 to 1323 BCE, Tutankhamun remained largely a puppet king, still too young to rule. Real power lay with influential viziers, such as Ay and generals like Horemheb. Nonetheless, under the young king's name, the court undertook significant reforms. The capital was moved back from Akhetaten to Memphis and Thebes. The temples of Ammonius were rebuilt, the priesthood of Ammonius regained authority, and traditional Egyptian religion was reinstated. This religious restoration helped stabilize the national psyche, which had been shaken by nearly 2 decades of upheaval. Interestingly, while Tutankhamun did not achieve military or architectural greatness, he did sponsor a few modest building projects, mostly aimed at completing or restoring abandoned temples. He is also depicted in some inscriptions as leading minor military campaigns in Nubia and against rebellious Canaanite vassals, though these were likely symbolic gestures with little historical substance. Tutankhamun died very young, at around 18 or 19 years old. The cause of his death remains one of Egyptology's greatest mysteries. Some theories suggest he suffered from congenital illnesses, possibly due to inbreeding. His parents are believed to be Akhenaten and one of his full sisters. Others suspect a chariot accident, or even a political assassination. But what turned Tutankhamun into a global legend was not his reign, but the discovery of his nearly intact tomb in the Valley of the Kings, unearthed by Howard Carter in 1922. In that small yet treasure-filled chamber, the world uncovered the famous golden mask, along with thousands of priceless artifacts, statues, jewelry, weapons, chariots, and the mummified body of the young king himself. This discovery shocked the world, becoming one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century, sparking a widespread Egyptomania across the Western world. Following Tutankhamun's death, the Egyptian throne entered a brief period of political instability. Power initially fell into the hands of Ay, an elderly courtier who had served as a close advisor to both Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. But Ay's reign was short-lived, and upon his death, the throne passed to a completely different figure, Horemheb, the commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army. Horemheb was not of royal blood, nor a member of the immediate royal family. However, he held military control and enjoyed the support of loyal officials. When he ascended the throne around 1323 BC, Horemheb declared himself chosen by the gods to restore order after the chaos of the Amarna period. Horemheb's reign was marked by sweeping political and legal reforms. From the outset, he launched a campaign to purge the officials who had profited under Akhenaten's regime, those who had disrupted traditional order by promoting Aten and undermining Egypt's ancestral deities. Several surviving stele record Horemheb's reform decrees. He introduced strict regulations against corruption, punished abusive officials, and ensured fair treatment of the population in matters like taxation and labor conscription. This was one of the rare moments in Egyptian history when a pharaoh focused more on rule of law than purely on divine authority. In terms of religion, Horemheb continued the restoration efforts begun by Tutankhamun and Ay. He reinstated the worship of Ammonius and the priesthood of Thebes. Temples abandoned during the Amarna era were rebuilt, traditional rituals were revived, and the clergy of Ammonius regained power. In doing so, Horemheb gradually erased the legacy of Aten and the Amarna period, reasserting the concept of Ma'at, the cosmic order and divine justice that had been shaken for nearly 2 decades. Significantly, Horemheb had no sons to succeed him. He chose another general, Paramesu, as a successor. This man would ascend the throne as Ramesses I, founding Dynasty 19. Horemheb's decision reflects his understanding of the need for strong succession to prevent the return of instability. Ramses I, 1292 to 1290 BCE, inaugurated the 19th dynasty. Although his reign lasted only about 2 years, he played a pivotal role in passing the throne to his son Seti I under conditions of stability. Before his death, Ramses I reinforced the court after the chaos of the Amarna period, reorganized the military and bureaucracy, and laid the groundwork for a national revival. 444. Seti I, 1290 to 1279 BCE, continued his father's work, becoming one of Egypt's most formidable military pharaohs. He launched major campaigns, defeating vassal states in Canaan, penetrating deep into Syria, and directly confronting the Hittites, reaffirming Egypt's status as a great power. But Seti I was not only a warrior, he was also a magnificent builder. His temple at Abydos stands as a masterpiece, adorned with exquisite reliefs and housing the famous Abydos king list, a canonical list of pharaohs that affirmed the continuity of Egypt's royal lineage. His son, Ramses II, 1279-1213 BCE, often known as Ramses the Great, is widely considered the most celebrated and iconic pharaoh of ancient Egypt, both militarily and culturally. He reigned for over 60 years, an exceptionally long rule, and transformed Egypt into a regional superpower, inscribing his name in stone across the length of the Nile through monumental constructions. Ramses II ascended the throne amid the grandeur of a strong dynasty, but also under the pressure of facing a powerful rival in the Hittite Empire. For generations, both Egypt and the Hittites had vied for Syria, a region filled with wealthy city-states that lay on the critical trade routes between the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. At the heart of this conflict stood the city of Kadesh. In the fifth year of his reign, around 1274 BCE, Ramses II personally led a massive army of approximately 20,000 troops, divided into 4 divisions named after the gods Ammonius, Ra, Ta, and Seth, marching northward through Canaan. The Egyptian forces were equipped with elite 2-man chariot divisions, seasoned infantry, and an unwavering confidence in their pharaoh's might. But Ramses had no idea that his adversary, Hittite King Muwatalli II, had devised a brilliant ambush. As Ramses and the Ammonius division approached Kadesh, he received reports from captured Hittite prisoners, who were in fact spies, claiming that the Hittite army was still far away. Trusting their words, Ramses advanced rapidly, separating from the other divisions. Upon setting up camp near Kadesh, he discovered too late that the full Hittite army, some 40,000 men and over 3,000 3-man chariots, had already been lying in wait. The Hittites launched a surprise attack, their heavy chariots crashing into the Egyptian camp, throwing Ramses' forces into chaos. In this dire moment, Ramses II revealed the bearing of a true warrior king. Mounted on his chariot, he and his personal guard charged into the heart of the enemy, rallying his troops and leading the counterattack. In later inscriptions at Abu Simbel and the Ramesseum, Ramses is depicted as a godlike figure, single-handedly vanquishing thousands of foes. Though likely embellished for propaganda, his bravery clearly stabilized the battlefield. At that critical hour, the Ta division arrived in time to reinforce and break the Hittite assault. The battle turned into a fierce stalemate, lasting for hours, with neither side claiming decisive victory. In the end, Ramses II was forced to retreat, while the Hittites retained control of Kadesh. Yet in the grand scheme of things, neither side had the strength to decisively defeat the other. A few years later, both Egypt and the Hittite Empire realized that continued warfare only drained their resources, especially as common threats, nomadic tribes, and the rising Assyrian power began to emerge. Thus, in 1259 BCE, Ramses II and Hattusili III, the younger brother and successor of Muwatalli II, signed a peace treaty inscribed in both cuneiform and hieroglyphs, now recognized as the oldest known surviving bilateral peace treaty in human history. Ramses II was not only known for war, but also revered as the great builder king. He left behind a vast legacy of monumental works. The temple at Abu Simbel, with colossal statues over 20 meters tall carved directly into mountainside, aligned with the sun, the massive Ramesseum mortuary temple, and major expansions at Karnak and Luxor. His name was also inscribed onto many earlier monuments, making it difficult for later generations to distinguish between his own achievements and those he inherited. During his reign, Egypt reached the pinnacle of its power, wealth, and stability. Arts and culture flourished, from colossal statues and battle reliefs to hymns praising the pharaoh. To the people, Ramses II embodied the image of a divine, eternal ruler upholding Ma'at, the cosmic order. Later Egyptians, from the New Kingdom to the Greco-Roman era, revered him as the greatest pharaoh, the ultimate symbol of Egypt's golden age. After his remarkably long reign, the throne passed to Merneptah, 1213-1203 BCE, his 13th son, as many of the elder princes had died. Though elderly when he ascended the throne, Merneptah proved to be a vigorous ruler, facing serious challenges both from within and without. At the start of his reign, he had to fend off invasions by the Sea Peoples and Libyan forces on Egypt's western frontier. In a major military campaign, Merneptah defeated a coalition of over 40,000 Libyans and allied tribes from the Aegean and Anatolia. This victory was recorded on the Merneptah stele, erected at his temple in Thebes. The stele also contains a historically significant reference. It marks the first known mention of Israel in Egyptian records, describing it as a small people group in Canaan, the earliest non-biblical reference to the Israelites, making it one of the most important archaeological artifacts ever discovered. After Merneptah's death, Egypt entered a period of instability. The throne passed to his son, Seti II, 1203 to 1197 BCE. But his authority was soon challenged. A rival, possibly a non-royal lineage, named Amenmès, seized power in southern Egypt, creating a period of dual kingship that lasted several years. When Seti II eventually regained full control, the court had already been deeply damaged by intrigue and internal strife. Following Seti II, the throne passed to Siptah, 1197 to 1191 BC, a young king who may have been an illegitimate son of either Seti II or Amenmès. Due to his youth and frail health, real power was held by the Chancellor Bey, a powerful official of foreign origin, possibly Syrian or Canaanite. Under Siptah, the country remained unstable, with many local regions operating semi-independently, and the royal court steadily losing its authority. Ultimately, the throne passed to Tuzret 1191 to 1189 BCE, the widow of Seti II. She became one of the few female pharaohs in Egyptian history, declaring herself ruler and reigning for several years. Tuzret commissioned a lavish tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV-14, originally intended for herself and her late husband. However, her reign ended in turmoil. A civil war broke out, with nobles and officials rising in rebellion. Her downfall marked the end of Dynasty 19 and paved the way for a new military figure, Setnakht, founder of Dynasty XX. After the death of the female pharaoh Tuzret and the collapse of Dynasty 19, Egypt plunged into chaos. The throne was contested, civil war broke out, and both local nobles and foreign-born officials rose up in a struggle for power. In this turbulent context, a general named Setnakht, 1189 to 1186 BC, emerged as a restorer of order. He founded Dynasty XX, crushed rival factions, reclaimed Memphis, and reasserted the authority of the pharaoh. Though his reign lasted only 3 years, Setnakht succeeded in stabilizing the country, laying the foundation for his son, Ramses III, to continue. Ramses III, 1186 to 1155 BCE, is considered the last truly powerful pharaoh of ancient Egypt. He ascended the throne during a time when the Mediterranean world was being shaken by mass migrations and invasions by the Sea Peoples, and Ramses III bore the heavy responsibility of defending Egypt. He led 2 major campaigns against this formidable alliance. On land, Ramses III positioned his forces along Egypt's eastern frontier, halting the Sea Peoples near the Gaza region. The reliefs at the Medinet Habu temple depict dramatic scenes of battle, with Egyptian archers, infantry, and chariots crushing the invaders. At sea, he organized a naval fleet to intercept the enemy at the mouth of the Nile. As the enemy's ships entered, Egyptian forces used nets, grappling hooks, and arrows fired from the banks, in coordination with warships, to destroy the invading force. This is considered one of the earliest recorded naval battles in history. Victory over the Sea Peoples spared Egypt from the fate of many other Mediterranean civilizations of the time, the Hittites, Mycenaeans, and others that were completely destroyed. However, this was also Egypt's last imperial victory. After the wars, Ramses III continued campaigns into Nubia and Libya and sponsored construction of grand monuments. Most notable is his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu in Thebes, a vast fortress-like complex with towering walls, colonnaded courtyards, and dramatic reliefs celebrating his military victories. This structure served as both his tomb and a vivid testament to the last flicker of classical Egyptian power. However, court intrigues would soon shake the royal palace. Late in Ramses III's reign, a major palace conspiracy, known as the Harem Conspiracy, was uncovered. One of his queens, Tai, plotted to assassinate him in order to place her son on the throne. Numerous officials, priests, and palace guards were implicated. Trial records found in the Turin Judicial Papyrus and other legal texts reveal that the plot was discovered and dozens of conspirators were executed. Yet Ramses III's mummy shows a deep wound on the throat, evidence that he was in fact successfully assassinated in 1155 BCE. Ramses IV, 1155 to 1149 BCE, succeeded his father after this tragic death. He sought to reaffirm his authority through ambitious construction projects in Thebes and through expansion of mining expeditions for copper, gold, and precious stones in Sinai and Nubia. Surviving papyri detail the mobilization of thousands of workers, demonstrating that Egypt still retained some capacity for resource mobilization. However, the economy, already strained by the wars and court corruption during Ramses III's reign, could no longer support such endeavors. Corruption and embezzlement within the bureaucracy became increasingly evident. Ramses V, 1149 to 1145 BCE, ruled briefly, but is most noted for administrative documents known as the Wilbur Papyrus, which records detailed information about land ownership, taxation, and the influence of the Ammonius priesthood in Thebes. These documents clearly show how economic and political power had shifted toward the priesthood. Ramses VI, 1145 to 1137 BCE, continued the royal building tradition, expanding his royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings. In fact, his reuse and extension of an earlier tomb site helped shield the tomb of Tutankhamun, located just below it, from looters for centuries. However, during his reign, the financial crisis became starkly apparent. Workers building royal tombs went on strike due to food shortages, an event considered one of the earliest recorded labor strikes in history. Ramses VII, 1137 to 1130 BCE, and Ramses VIII, 1130 to 1129 BCE, left few marks on history, reflecting a time when the royal court had grown weak and could no longer support large-scale building projects or military campaigns. Ramses IX, 1129 to 1111 BCE, is best remembered for the widespread looting of royal tombs, including many in the Valley of the Kings. Records from the Abbot Papyrus detail the investigations of numerous officials, craftsmen, and soldiers implicated in grave robbery, evidence of the growing disorder and erosion of central authority. Ramses X, 1111 to 1107 BCE, had a short and unremarkable reign. But during his rule, Egypt's governmental decline became more pronounced. The army was no longer fully loyal to the pharaoh, large territories were left unprotected, and looting became widespread. Ramses XI, 1107 to 1069 BCE, was the last pharaoh of dynasty XX and the one who witnessed the final collapse of the new kingdom. Under his rule, Egypt became fractured. In the south, the high priest Ammonius in Thebes effectively ruled independently, while in the north, the general Smen took control of the Nile Delta and would later found dynasty XXI. Though Ramses XI still bore the title of pharaoh, his power was merely symbolic. Upon his death around 1069 BCE, Egypt's glorious new kingdom came to a definitive end, and the country entered the third intermediate period, a time of fragmentation and decentralization. After the death of Ramses XI, Egypt entered a period of marked decentralization. In the north, Smen's Eye, a powerful official in the Delta region, took advantage of the political vacuum and declared himself pharaoh, founding dynasty XXI around 1069 BCE, with his capital at Tanis. However, his authority did not extend across all of Egypt. In the south, the city of Thebes remained under control of the high priest of Ammonius, who held dominion over the Karnak temple treasury, maintained their own military forces, and wielded immense influence in religious affairs. Thus began an era of dual power centers in Egypt, Tanis in the north and Thebes in the south, who cooperated under guise of national unity, yet quietly competed for influence. Smen's Eye is regarded as the architect of this dual structure. He did not launch grand military campaigns like the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, but instead focused on consolidating stability in the Delta. Under his rule, Egypt was no longer an expansionist empire, but closed kingdom, prioritizing internal order and maintaining a delicate balance with the Theban priesthood. 488. His most notable successor was Sesen's I, 1047 to 1001 BCE. Though his reign did not stand out in terms of territorial expansion, he left behind a priceless archaeological legacy. His tomb at Tanis, discovered in the 1940s, is one of the few intact royal tombs ever found in Egypt. Unlike Tutankhamun's small but famous untouched tomb, Sesen's burial shocked the world with its opulence: a golden death mask, a silver sarcophagus, a metal rarer than gold in Egypt, and countless other treasures. This indicates that although Egypt had declined politically and militarily, the Delta remained a fertile and wealthy region capable of amassing great riches. Under the kings of Tanis, Egypt transformed into a kingdom without imperial ambition. The pharaoh's power was now curtailed by nobles and priests. Thebes remained a parallel power center, where the high priests Ammonius were buried in lavish tombs rivaling those of the pharaohs. The two regions of Egypt, north and south, were nominally unified, yet increasingly fractured beneath the surface, reflecting a nation no longer basking in the glory of the new kingdom, but gradually slipping into disintegration. When Dynasty XXI came to a close, Egypt entered a new era deeply influenced by foreign elements. Dynasty XXII, commonly known as the Libyan dynasty. It was founded by Shoshenq I, 945 to 924 BCE, a leader of Libyan descent who had been assimilated into Egyptian society over generations. He seized power in Bubastis in the eastern delta and proclaimed himself pharaoh. To assert his authority, Shoshenq launched a notable campaign into Canaan, reaching Jerusalem, an event recorded in the Bible under the name Shishak. At home, he strategically placed his relatives in key religious offices, including the powerful position of high priest Ammonius in Thebes, thus managing, for a brief period, to unify both North and South Egypt under his rule, a rare feat in this era of division. However, this balance did not last. His successor, Teklat I, 924 to 889 BCE, maintained power in the north but faced growing resistance from the south. In Thebes, the Ammonius priesthood, accustomed to independence, refused to accept interference from Bubastis. Thus, Egypt once again fell into division. The north ruled by Libyan kings, the south dominated by powerful priests. Amid this instability, the reign of Osorkon II, 872 to 837 BCE, is considered a rare moment of prosperity. Osorkon focused on political consolidation and monumental construction, building in both Bubastis and Karnak, expressing his desire to bridge the two regions through religion. His era was relatively free from war, instead marked by a flourishing of art and devotion. Reliefs carved at Karnak during his reign depict grand festivals and solemn rituals, reflecting the wealth and symbolic power of the king. But when Osorkon II died, stability faded with him. Power within the Libyan royal family fractured into multiple branches, each claiming the title of pharaoh over a specific region. Thebes, in turn, became increasingly independent, as the authority of the high priest Ammonius surged once more, bringing Egypt back into a familiar state of fragmentation. Thus, the Libyan dynasty left behind a paradoxical legacy: moments of unity and strength under Shoshenq I and Osorkon II, yet also the seeds of disunity that paved the way for rising local dynasties. As Osorkon II's influence waned, Egypt no longer had a central power strong enough to hold the nation together. History then entered a uniquely chaotic phase. Dynasty XXII, 837 to 728 BC. This was not a single ruling house, but rather a collection of Libyan royal branches, each declaring themselves pharaoh in different regions. In Heracleopolis, Leontopolis, and Hermopolis, separate factions established their own mini-dynasties, complete with armies, taxation systems, and rituals. In the Delta, cities like Bubastis and Tanis still had Libyan rulers vying for dominance, while Thebes had all but become an independent theocracy, ruled by the high priest Ammonius, with power equal to that of any pharaoh. Egypt had splintered into a jigsaw puzzle of competing kings, all building temples and inscribing their names on monuments. Yet in reality, Each controlled only a slice of territory. Amid this confusion, some figures still sought to reunify the land. Foremost among them was Tefnacht, a strong man from the city of Sais in the western delta. He founded Dynasty Ziv 728 to 720 BCE with the ambition of restoring centralized rule. Tefnacht was not alone in his vision. He skillfully forged alliances across the delta, creating a bloc capable of resisting internal rivals as well as a new threat from the south. The rising kingdom of Nubia centered in Napata. For the first time in generations, Egypt saw a leader with the potential to unify its fractured provinces. But just as Tefnacht consolidated his power in the north, Nubia, under Pi, was preparing to cross the border, bringing a radically different chapter to Egyptian history. After a century of infighting between native and Libyan rulers, Egypt's story took a dramatic turn. From the south came a new unifying force, the Nubians, who had long absorbed Egyptian culture and religion. Now, they seized the opportunity to reunify Egypt. This marked the rise of Dynasty XXV, the Nubian dynasty, 747 to 664 BC, a short but profound era when Egypt was ruled by black pharaohs from Kush. It all began with Kashta, 747 to 735 BCE. Rather than marching in with swords, Kashta adopted a subtle strategy. He married his daughter into the powerful priesthood of Ammonius at Thebes, thereby gaining influence over the religious heart of Egypt. This soft power approach allowed Nubia to plant its roots in the south, paving the way for full conquest. The man who made that dream a reality was Pi, or Pianki, 744 to 714 BCE. Seeing the northern delta torn apart by rival Libyan rulers, Pi launched a swift military campaign. He crossed the Nile, defeated the Delta lords, and captured Memphis, Egypt's traditional political center. In a surviving victory stela, Pi boasted that it united the two lands beneath his feet, not just through force, but through divine authority of Ammonius. For the first time in centuries, Egypt was reunited, but this time under Nubian rule. Under Shabaka, 714 to 705 BCE, Nubian power was further consolidated. He maintained political control and deliberately revived the spirit of the Old Kingdom. Shabaka's monuments reflected ancient artistic styles, and he even commissioned new copies of damaged religious texts, earning the Nubian dynasty the title of a classical Egyptian Renaissance among modern scholars. Shabikku, 705 to 690 BCE, continued the Nubian legacy and held the country together. But he now faced a formidable challenge from the east, the rise of the Assyrian Empire. More than just a military threat, Assyria employed brutal strategies of conquest, signaling Egypt's entry into an age of international collision. The reign of Taharqa, 690 to 664 BC, marked both the peak and the unraveling of Nubian rule. He commissioned monumental works, ruled over a strong Egypt, and for a time even intervened in Canaan, Palestine to oppose the Assyrians. But this direct confrontation exhausted Egypt. The Assyrians invaded repeatedly, seized Memphis, and ravaged Thebes. Though Taharqa resisted with determination, Nubia could not withstand the full might of the Assyrian war machine. By 664 BCE, the Assyrians had crushed the Nubians, driving them back to Kush, permanently ending Dynasty XXV. After more than a century under control of Nubia and then Assyria, Egypt entered a brief period of revival under Dynasty XXVI, the Sate Dynasty, 664 to 525 BC, when Assyria defeated the Nubians and installed local rulers in Sais, a city in the western Nile Delta. It initially appeared to be nothing more than a puppet regime, but from this foundation, a new line of kings seized a moment, revived Egypt and restored it, albeit briefly, to the map of regional powers. The founder of this renaissance was Santic I, 664 to 610 BC. At first merely a vassal of Assyria, he skillfully exploited the empire's decline. as it became embroiled with Babylon and Media, to gradually win full independence. Psamtik succeeded in reunifying the entire country for the first time after centuries of fragmentation, establishing his capital at Sais. Remarkably, he employed Greek mercenaries, a new phenomenon in Egyptian warfare. From this point onward, Greek forces became a familiar component of the Egyptian army, and Greek settlements gradually took root in the Delta, marking the beginning of a long-lasting Hellenic presence. In terms of religion and architecture, Psamtik restored many temples, asserted his legitimacy as a true successor of the Pharaohs, and elevated Sais as a new political and religious center. His son, Necho II, 610 to 595 BCE, became notable for his ambitions in maritime trade and public works. Necho launched a bold initiative, the construction of a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, a precursor to the modern Suez Canal. Though the project was never fully completed, it reflected a visionary understanding of Egypt's potential as a hub of maritime commerce. He also built a powerful navy, staffed in part by Greek sailors, in an effort to project Egyptian influence over Syria, Palestine. Necho is even mentioned in the Bible during the Battle of Megiddo, 609 BCE, where King Josiah Judah was killed resisting the Egyptian army. For Egypt, this moment marked a brief return to the Near Eastern stage, but only for a fleeting time. After Necho, the throne passed to Psamtik II, 595 to 589 BCE. Though his reign was short, he made a significant impact by launching a military campaign into Nubia, destroying the monuments of former enemies to reaffirm Egyptian dominance. He also maintained extensive trade networks, continued employing Greek mercenaries, and secured vital commercial routes. His successor, Apries, 589 to 570 BCE, endured a tumultuous reign. He intervened in Canaan to challenge Babylon, but suffered a crushing defeat, severely damaging his legitimacy. Domestic uprisings followed, ultimately leading to his overthrow. Apries serves as a prime example of how a pharaoh's authority during this period depended heavily on international diplomacy and military success, and how a single failure could topple a ruler. After years of instability, the Sate dynasty reached its peak under Ahmesis II, 570 to 526 BCE, one of the most remarkable pharaohs of Egypt's later history. Of commoner origin, Ahmesis was elevated to the throne by the military after the deposition of Apries. Ironically, his lack of noble blood helped him gain widespread popular support. He ruled for over 40 years, transforming Egypt into one of the wealthiest and most prosperous nations in the Mediterranean world. Ahmesis stood out for his open foreign policy, particularly toward the Greeks. He not only employed Greek mercenaries and sailors, but also granted them the city of Naucratis in the Nile Delta, a Greek-exclusive trading port within Egypt. Thanks to this, Naucratis quickly became a hub of international exchange, where goods from the Mediterranean and the Nile converged. Under Ahmesis II, Egypt was enveloped in an early atmosphere of globalization. Greek merchants, Levantine artisans, and native Egyptians coexisted in bustling urban centers. Domestically, Ahmesis promoted a movement of traditional revival. The art and architecture of his time strongly echoed Old Kingdom aesthetics. Statues bore a solid, proud form reminiscent of the pharaohs of Giza. Ahmesis undertook the restoration of numerous temples in Memphis, Sais, and especially Karnak, as if to assert himself as a protector of Ma'at, the cosmic order, after centuries of decline. Toward the end of the Sate dynasty, as Ahmesis II aged, the international stage grew tense. To the east, the Persian Empire rose under Cambyses II, who had just inherited the throne from Cyrus the Great. To legitimize his ambitions of advancing toward the Nile, Cambyses sent envoys to Egypt to request the hand of Pharaoh Amesis's daughter in marriage. Ahmesis, seasoned and shrewd, knew he could not refuse outright, but still sought to save face. So he devised a deception. Rather than send his own daughter, he dispatched Nitys, the daughter of Apries, the former king whom Ahmesis had overthrown. But the scheme quickly backfired. Upon arriving in Persia, Nitys boldly revealed her true identity and recounted the humiliation her family had suffered at Amesis's hands. Her words served as fuel to Cambyses' burning ambitions. He perceived the deception as a grave insult, one that demanded vengeance. Thus, a diplomatic proposal turned into a casus belli. When Amasis II died in 526 BCE, the throne passed to his son, Psamtik III, 526 to 525 BC. But the young pharaoh barely had a chance to rule. Just a year after his accession, he faced an invasion by Persian forces. In the Battle of Pelusium, 525 BCE, the Egyptian army was decisively defeated. Psamtik was captured and later executed. With this crushing defeat, Dynasty XXVI came to an end in Egypt for the first time, became a province under a foreign empire, the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Cambyses II, successor to Cyrus, not only conquered Memphis, but also transformed the entire Nile Valley into a satrapy or Persian administrative province. Egyptians retained their priests and civil officials, but ultimate authority lay in the hands of a Persian satrap, based in Memphis. Cambyses is remembered through contradictory accounts. Some sources describe him as respectful of Egypt's gods, while others claim he desecrated temples and even slaughtered the sacred Apis bull. Whatever the truth, his reign left a deep and bitter imprint on the Egyptian memory. After Cambyses, the throne passed to Darius I, 522 to 486 BCE, whose reign brought a markedly different tone. Unlike his predecessor, Darius focused on efficient administration. He commissioned major infrastructure projects, including irrigation systems, dikes, and most notably, the continuation of the canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, a grand endeavor linking Egyptian trade to the Persian Gulf. During his rule, many temples were restored and had inscriptions carved in multiple languages, Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian, and Egyptian hieroglyphs to assert his multicultural authority. Though now a vassal state, Egypt remained a vital commercial node in the vast Persian Empire. Under Xerxes I, 486 to 465 BCE, imperial policies shifted decisively. Xerxes, famous for his Greek campaigns, paid little attention to appeasing the Egyptians. He increased taxes, brutally suppressed local uprisings, and diminished the authority of the Ammonius priesthood. In Egyptian eyes, these acts were an unbearable humiliation. As a result, for nearly a century afterward, the region saw a series of uprisings, each of which was crushed by the Persians. Egypt remained shackled in the status of a subject province. It was not until 404 BCE that a new opportunity emerged. Amartius, a native leader from Sais, led a successful revolt that expelled the Persians. He founded the 28th dynasty, but he would be its only pharaoh. During his brief reign, Amartius is remembered less for architectural legacies and more for the victory of liberation. His court failed to consolidate power, plagued by internal divisions, and after his death, Egypt once again fell into the hands of competing factions. Yet Amartius' name lived on in Egyptian memory as the only native king to rise up and, for a fleeting moment, restore national independence. Following Amartius' death, Egypt entered the era of the 29th dynasty, 399 to 380 BC. Headquartered at Mendes, this was a period marked by continued resistance against the looming Persian threat. Pharaohs such as Nepherites I, Haker, and Nepherites II are remembered not for grand temples, but for tense military and diplomatic campaigns. They actively sought allies in the Greek world, sometimes with Athens, sometimes with Sparta, to form a balance of power against the mighty Persian Empire. These alliances placed Egypt within the framework of international diplomacy, but also highlighted that the Nile Kingdom no longer held the absolute strength of the New Kingdom era. With the rise of the 30th dynasty, 380 to 343 BC, Egypt experienced a brief but remarkable revival. Its founder, Nectanebo I, successfully repelled the Persians, regaining a precious window of independence. During his reign, Egypt regained confidence by launching a wave of temple construction across the land, in Karnak, Luxor, and especially Philae, which became a magnificent center of Isis worship. Nectanebo I is regarded as the last native king to elevate Egyptian religious architecture to such influential heights, leaving a lasting imprint on the cultural landscape. After Nectanebo I, his son Teos ascended the throne, 362 to 360 BC. Ambitious and bold, Teos planned a large-scale military campaign against Persia, even enlisting Greek military support. However, his overconfidence in tax hikes to fund the war alienated the nobility, leading to his overthrow. His successor was Nectanebo II, 360 to 343 BC, one of the most remembered of Egypt's final native kings. Nectanebo II was not only a resilient warrior, but also a monumental builder. Some of the last major religious structures of ancient Egypt are attributed to him, from Isis temples at Philae to projects at Karnak and Hermopolis. Yet even he could not withstand the might of Persia under Artaxerxes III. Defeated and exiled to Nubia, Nectanebo II became the last native pharaoh, bringing an end to over 3 millennia of Egyptian rule by Egyptians. From that point on, the 31st dynasty, 343 to 332 BCE, known as the Second Persian period, reduced Egypt to a fully subjugated province. This era is remembered by Egyptians as one of harsh oppression. Temple funding was slashed, taxes were raised, and the Persian military ruled with an iron fist. Numerous uprisings broke out, but were swiftly suppressed. The climax came in 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great entered Egypt. The people welcomed him as a liberator, ending Persian rule and opening the door to the Hellenistic, Ptolemaic era. In the grand view, the late period, 664 to 332 BC, was a time in which Egypt constantly oscillated between native independence and foreign domination. Politically, the country was perpetually on the defensive, at times relying on alliances with the Greeks, at others caught in the vortex of Persian imperial ambitions. Culturally, the era witnessed a classical revival. Many temples were rebuilt, and the artistic styles of the Old Kingdom were resurrected as a statement of national identity. Religiously, the gods Ammonius and Isis remained central, yet Hellenic influences began to appear subtly. The syncretism of deities, such as Zeus Ammonius, laid the foundation for the Greco-Egyptian religious landscape that would flourish under the Ptolemaic dynasty. This was a period both tragic and transitional. Egypt remained rich in cultural identity, but had lost the strength to sustain its imperial glory of old. Modern Egypt is no longer the mighty empire once ruled by pharaohs, yet the legacy of over 3 millennia is still vividly present in every inch of its land. The pyramids of Giza, the Great Sphinx, the temples of Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel, and the Valley of the Kings in Thebes still stand tall, drawing millions of visitors each year and serving as immortal symbols of Nile River civilization. Today's Egyptians live in a country shaped by both Islamic-era traditions and the glorious memory of their ancestors, with Cairo serving as a vibrant capital that blends the modern and the ancient. Despite countless conquests and upheavals, Egypt has preserved a vital role in the politics of the Middle East and North Africa, both as a modern nation and as a bridge that connects the world to a distant past where pharaohs once reigned. This is Egypt's enduring uniqueness, a country living in the present, yet forever rooted in its mythic heritage.